Liam Foster's cotton blanket was still warm when the one-year-old boy vanished from the farming community in Seminole County, Oklahoma. Population 7,214, December 20th, 1955. Arrived with the season's first cold wind sweeping across the dry oil fields and frozen wooden fences. At 4:55 p.m., the family's neighbor, Ruth Halpern, waved through her kitchen window as Marjorie Foster bent down to retie the scarf for her daughter Sarah on the front porch. Liam's stroller was still there, covered with a thin layer of frost, next to the wooden toy he always held in his hand. Ruth saw the silhouette of a strange woman pause in front of the fence, a gray-blue scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, the wind blowing it sideways toward the dirt road leading to the fields. What happened in the next 4 minutes would haunt Seminole for the next 6 decades. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The atmosphere in Oklahoma in 1955 cast a characteristic tranquility over the small towns, red dirt roads mottled with tire tracks, oil pumps scattered along the horizon, and sparse residential areas where every family knew each other's names. The town of Seminole lived slowly, orderly, and safely enough that children often played outside until late afternoon without anyone thinking of risks. In that setting, the Foster family, consisting of Henry, Marjorie, 9-year-old daughter, Sarah, and 1-year-old Liam, lived in a simple but warm wooden house at the end of the dirt road leading to the fields. Henry worked day shifts at the oil rig, usually returning near late afternoon, while Marjorie stayed home caring for the 2 children, managing everything in the family according to the steady rhythm of many years. Sarah, a quick and sensitive little girl, was naturally attached to Liam in the way of a young but mature older sister. Every morning, Sarah helped her mother watch him, pushing the stroller around the front yard, telling the toddling boy, who was just starting to babble a few simple sounds about school. Liam was gentle, smiling often, and especially attached to his sister. Whenever Sarah stepped away briefly, his round eyes would immediately search for her. That fateful afternoon unfolded like any other day, but a few small details made the atmosphere strangely unusual. At noon, Sarah saw a gray truck driving slowly past twice, unlike the habit of delivery vehicles on this road that usually passed once and disappeared around the curve. In the early afternoon, a young woman appeared at the intersection near the house, asking for directions to a farm a few miles away, even though the direction she was pointed in led nowhere near it. Sarah stood behind the gate, not hearing the conversation clearly, but the woman's gaze made the girl uncomfortable without being able to explain why. As the sun tilted westward, the neighbor's dog began barking persistently toward the back fence, where there was nothing but a row of weeds and empty land. Marjorie just thought it was the dog's reaction to wildlife and didn't pay further attention. Toward late afternoon, Marjorie placed Liam in the stroller in the front yard, next to where Sarah was sitting reorganizing a pile of toys. Everything happened normally, a little girl busily arranging, a baby clumsily playing with his wooden toy, and a mother quickly turning back into the kitchen to get a bottle of milk, thinking it would take less than half a minute. But that brief moment cut a straight line severing the Foster family's life. When Marjorie stepped back into the yard, Sarah was bending down to pick up a fallen toy, looking up just a few seconds later, but Liam was no longer sitting in the stroller. The wooden gate next to it was slightly ajar with the wind, the small wheel marks of the stroller still imprinted on the dirt ground, but there were no toddler footprints, no crying, no loud noise, just a sudden emptiness that was hard to believe. Sarah called for Liam, then called louder, running around the yard, running to the fence, eyes wide in horror. Marjorie rushed to the gate, looking down the dirt road stretching between 2 rows of trees, trying to find a figure or even the smallest movement. The mother and daughter launched into a spontaneous search, sweeping every corner of the yard, every low bush behind the house, then running to knock on neighbors' doors, hoping someone had accidentally seen Liam crawl out. They called Henry all over town via landline, but he hadn't left his shift yet. In just a few minutes, Confusion turned into an increasingly tightening fear as no one found any trace of Liam within the radius around the house. When Sarah sobbed that she had heard an engine sound fading away earlier, but didn't catch a clear look, Marjorie understood they were facing something worse than a lost child. With trembling hands and a choked voice, Marjorie stepped inside, picked up the phone receiver, and dialed the sheriff's office, reporting that her 1-year-old son had disappeared from the front yard in less than half a minute. On the other end of the line, the slight static of the connection did not diminish the panic in the mother's voice, prompting the operator to immediately transfer the call to the command level. The call was connected directly to the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, where that late afternoon only one duty officer remained to receive information. Upon hearing the description that a 1-year-old child had vanished right in the front yard in no more than 30 seconds, the duty officer immediately understood this was not a typical missing child case they usually handled. The report was recorded and immediately forwarded to Sheriff Clifford Hale, who was just preparing to leave the office when he received the information. Hale immediately halted all end-of-day plans, returned to his desk, verified the call details again, and requested the duty officer to contact the Foster family once more to lock in the last time Liam was seen. Just a few minutes later, he dispatched 2 deputies on the afternoon shift, instructing them to bring radios, flashlights, scene markers, and notepads before heading out immediately. In the 1950s, sheriff's forces in small towns, like Seminole, always operated under limited conditions: no specialized missing children unit, no forensic unit or surveillance cameras, most work relying on manual observation and statements. Therefore, Hale's first goal was to reach the scene as quickly as possible, preventing residents from accidentally trampling or obscuring traces on Oklahoma's characteristic red dirt. The patrol car turned onto the dirt road leading to the Foster house after more than 10 minutes, red dust billowing behind the wheels, and both deputies immediately got out, splitting to check the surrounding front yard area. Hale approached the door with his notepad in hand, requesting Marjorie and Sarah to sit in one spot and not move in the yard to avoid disturbing traces. He quickly surveyed the area where Liam disappeared: the stroller position, wind direction, gate condition, ground and wheel marks. Then, Hale asked Henry, who had just rushed back from the rig, to describe exactly what he knew, even though Henry was not present when the incident occurred. With enough information to understand the context, Hale proceeded to collect initial statements: the last time Liam was seen, the position of each family member during that time, the duration Marjorie was in the kitchen, Sarah's reaction, any strange sounds Sarah heard, and any unusual movements earlier that day. Hale paid special attention when Sarah mentioned the engine sound, leaving right after Liam disappeared, along with the image of a gray truck driving slowly past the house earlier. These details, combined with the extremely short disappearance time and the fact that Liam could not leave the yard on his own, immediately led Hale to rule out the possibility of a lost child. He assessed the risk level based on 3 core factors: the victim's age, the disappearance time, and the presence of a suspicious vehicle beforehand. All 3 matched the pattern of an intentional abduction. While the 2 deputies continued checking the perimeter around the yard, marking fresh tire tracks, Hale asked the family not to move further in the area to preserve the scene for the next recording step. He noted the time the report was received, the time of arrival at the scene, and drew a simple diagram of the positions of related elements: stroller, gate, direction to the road, where Sarah was standing. These factors helped him reconstruct the sequence of movements in his mind and reinforce the assessment that the perpetrator may have been observing beforehand, choosing the exact moment Marjorie looked away from Liam. Concluding the rapid assessment phase, Hale made his first professional conclusion. This was not an accident, not a case of a child wandering off or crawling onto the road, but a child abduction using a vehicle, executed quickly, intentionally, and at a precisely chosen moment. This conclusion became the foundation for shifting the case handling status from assisting in finding a lost child to opening a child abduction file, while prioritizing scene preservation and compiling a list of leads right from the first evening. When the scene was secured and support forces had stabilized the surrounding area, Hale directly directed the next step of the investigation. He instructed all personnel to limit movement within the yard and dirt road, marking suspicious areas before full darkness. From there, he began the Level 1 scene survey, focusing on 3 main points: the location where Liam disappeared, remaining traces on the red dirt, and the perpetrator's approach and withdrawal directions. He spent a few minutes observing the overall front yard surface, where the soil was soft and easily imprinted under weight, a rare favorable condition in rural missing child cases. Liam's stroller was still exactly where Sarah indicated, with no signs of being turned or strongly impacted, indicating the perpetrator did not use direct force at the point of taking the child. The stroller wheels left 2 thin parallel marks on the ground, and on the left side of the stroller was a slightly depressed area, enough to show the body weight of Liam had been there before disappearing. The empty space in front of the stroller, where Liam would have crawled or reached for the toy if moving himself, had absolutely no toddler footprints or rollover marks, ruling out the possibility he climbed out on his own. This reinforced Hale's assessment that the only contact affecting Liam at that moment came from another person. He moved to check the wooden gate area in front of the house, where Marjorie said when she ran out, the gate was slightly open. The gate hinges showed no signs of being pulled hard or broken, indicating it was opened by hand in a normal motion, not by strong force or kicking. The ground right under the gate had 2 deep impressions in the pattern of medium-weight truck tires, with width matching the axle of common pickups from the early 1950s. A notable point was that the right tire track was deeper than the left, suggesting the perpetrator may have braked suddenly or turned the wheel when stopping to approach Liam. Hale measured the wheel center distance to determine axle width, noted the tire tread characteristics, and used stakes to mark so no one would enter that area. Walking along the dirt road eastward, he discovered additional heavy tire impressions extending nearly 15 meters, gradually disappearing where the road surface became harder with more gravel. The diagonal tread pattern helped him narrow the suspect vehicle to a very specific group in that era's context, but he set aside deeper analysis to complete the scene survey first. Returning to the Foster yard, Hale continued surveying the soft soil under the tree shade on the right side of the stroller, where Sarah vaguely remembered seeing a shadow that afternoon. There, Hale discovered a lightly compressed elliptical area, indicating someone had stood in place long enough to press the soil down, but not create sharp footprints. This fit the possibility the perpetrator was lurking or observing before acting. The edge of the area had several bent grass blades, not in the wind direction from that afternoon, indicating human or object movement passing through. Hale assessed this as likely the perpetrator's initial approach point, where they could observe Liam from a hidden angle without Marjorie noticing from the kitchen. The distance from this standing point to the stroller was just over 3 meters, close enough for the perpetrator to reach in a few quick steps. After determining the approach direction, Hale continued identifying the withdrawal direction. Evidence on the ground in front of the gate showed the perpetrator carried Liam and went straight to the road, without lingering in the yard or circling behind the house. No footprints overlapped the tire tracks, indicating the perpetrator did not run in another direction, but directly took the victim toward the vehicle. The distance between the stroller and the gate was too short for the perpetrator to take much time. Hale estimated the time from approach to taking Liam off the scene did not exceed 10 seconds if surrounding factors did not obstruct. This required the perpetrator to have monitored before the moment Marjorie looked away, or at least observed the Foster house long enough to grasp the family's routine. The most important blind spot in the yard was the edge of the tree shade and the right fence, where just half a step back allowed a stranger to avoid view from the kitchen door. Hale assessed the perpetrator exploited this exact blind spot to approach the stroller undetected by anyone in the house. He noted details of the position, the afternoon sunlight making this area darker than the rest of the yard, creating conditions for the perpetrator to move in Sarah's limited line of sight. All these factors combined showed the perpetrator approached Liam from the side, quickly picked up the child, then withdrew along the same path toward the gate. Moving to the dirt road, opening the vehicle door, placing Liam inside, and leaving the area. The deep tire tracks could indicate the perpetrator accelerated quickly right after getting Liam in the vehicle to avoid detection by anyone nearby. After more than half an hour marking and recording the Level 1 scene, all parameters regarding position, traces, and action speed pointed to the same professional conclusion: the perpetrator had some preparation. Chose the exact moment the family was most vulnerable, exploited the terrain and blind spots to carry Liam out of the yard without creating any unusual noise. Hale moved to collecting Level 1 witness statements right after completing the Level 1 scene survey, because he knew the golden time to gather information from neighbors was the first hours before images and memories began to fade or be influenced by community rumors. He asked one deputy to compile a list of all households within about 300 meters of the Foster house, including 2 houses across, 3 to the east, a small farm behind, and 1 house at the dirt road turned to the pasture area. After identifying 8 households likely to have seen or heard activities during the time Liam disappeared, Hale divided the work. He handled the 4 closest to the Foster gate. The deputy handled those on the eastern edge and behind. Each household was recorded, with name, distance from their house to the Fosters, possible observation directions, and times they were home that afternoon. The first contacted was the Harold house, directly across the dirt road. Harold said he heard a strong revving sound around nearly 6 o'clock, but didn't see the vehicle because he was in the backyard tending chicken coops. This statement was marked medium value, as although he didn't see the vehicle, the timing of the sound matched Hale's estimated perpetrator departure time. At the next house, Ruth, an elderly woman living alone, said she saw a figure walking along the Foster fence around nearly 4 p.m., but wasn't sure if male or female. She remembered the figure paused for a few seconds, then continued toward the main road. This statement was important because it matched the compressed soil Hale found under the tree in the Foster yard, suggesting the perpetrator approached the area early. The Dunn house, about 4 houses east, provided another piece. Around a bit past 5, they saw a gray truck driving slowly past, briefly stopping at the turn, then continuing. The truck seemed old, body slightly dark, and according to Dunn, the engine sound was uneven, like a vehicle long unmaintained. Hale noted this because it matched the tread and depth of tracks at the Foster gate. At the farm behind the Fosters, owner Miller said he didn't see any strange person or vehicle entering the backfield area, but he faintly heard an engine starting from the dirt road in front of the Foster house, sound carrying on the wind. He assessed it as a small engine, not a large truck, matching Hale's narrowing of the light gray truck description. At the last house in the survey range, a young family with 2 small children reported hearing unusual barking from the neighboring dog around 5:30 and children's voices calling each other but couldn't confirm who. This statement was marked low reliability due to imprecise timing, but Hale still included it in the sound timeline because the barking could coincide with the perpetrator approaching the fence. When compiling the statements, Hale began shaping a relatively clear peripheral timeline. Accordingly, from around 4 p.m. there was the appearance of a stranger at the fence area. By around 5 or 5:10 p.m., the gray truck was described by 3 different households. Dunn saw it directly, Harold heard the revving, Miller heard the echo across the field. Cross-referencing with the gate tracks, Hale determined the perpetrator's departure time fit 5 o'clock, 5:15 p.m. To reconfirm, he returned to observe the gate and stroller position, remeasuring tree shadow length and sun direction at the time. Sarah described the event, thereby calculating actual observation feasibility from households. Determining sightlines helped eliminate inconsistent statements, such as the eastern household too far from the Fosters and blocked by trees, making direct view impossible. Conversely, opposite households like Harold's couldn't see directly, but heard engine sounds clearly, matching the wind direction carrying sound toward them that afternoon. Hale noted in his book, engine sound appearing before and after disappearance, forming a continuous sound sequence, allowing reconstruction of perpetrator movement in order. He continued analyzing the match between Dunn's statement and tire tracks. The truck driving slowly past, stopping at the turn, then accelerating away fit the two unusually deep tracks Hale recorded. This was one of the strongest leads connecting witness to scene. Additionally, Ruth's statement of a figure along the fence that afternoon matched the compressed area under the tree, suggesting the perpetrator approached by skirting the fence rather than stopping directly at the gate early. The cross-referencing results helped Hale rule out random action. The perpetrator was in the area at least once before striking. After nearly 2 hours collecting and analyzing Level 1 statements, Hale built a peripheral timeline with key markers around 4 p.m. first stranger appearance at fence. Around 5 o'clock p.m. gray truck presence in area. Around 5:05 to 5:15, most likely perpetrator departure with Liam. Each small detail from neighbor statements, when placed on the map and cross-referenced with physical traces, created a precise enough time circle to eliminate unreasonable possibilities and retain the most matching elements with the actual scene, helping shape the entire peripheral context around the incident time. Right after completing the compilation of Line 1 witness statements from the households around the Foster home, Hale moved on to the next step, surveying Line 2 witnesses located 3-5 miles from the scene, primarily focusing on the small commercial area along the dirt road connecting Seminole to the main highway. This area consisted of an independent grocery store, a gas station, an auto repair shop, and a diner catering to long-haul truck drivers. It was a place with higher foot traffic, especially in the afternoon, and a location where the perpetrator was highly likely to have appeared before or after committing the crime. Hale's goal was to determine whether the suspicious vehicle, a gray pickup truck, and the stranger seen around the Foster home had stopped at any of the establishments in this area near the time of the disappearance. The 3-5-mile distance was close enough for the perpetrator to stop for supplies or directions without affecting the timeline for approaching the scene. Harvey's grocery store was the first place Hale chose to survey, as it was where locals and strangers alike often stopped for essentials. The owner, Mr. Harvey Thompson, was a middle-aged man with a habit of closely observing customers since he only served a few dozen people each day, making everyone who entered easy to remember. When Hale asked about any unfamiliar customers that afternoon, Harvey immediately recalled a young woman in her early 30s, petite build, slightly disheveled dark brown hair, who appeared hurried and somewhat flustered when she entered the store around mid-afternoon. Harvey remembered that she bought a small blanket and a few miscellaneous items, but what caught his attention was the way she kept glancing toward the door, as if afraid someone was following her or waiting for someone to catch up. Harvey didn't recall if she was with anyone, but the image of this woman stood out because her demeanor was unlike that of a typical passerby. When Hale verified the time, around 4:35 to 4:45 p.m., he immediately flagged it because it fell right within the window when the perpetrator could have approached the Foster home area based on Line 1 statements. The store clerk, Lola, provided additional details. When the female customer left, she clearly saw her quickly walking toward a gray pickup truck parked in the open lot next to the store, the truck covered in red dust with a large scratch on the left side that was lighter in color than the rest of the body. Lola wasn't sure what the woman was holding, but it seemed like she was concealing a small object with the blanket. Lola emphasized that she couldn't clearly see if it was a baby or something else, but the concealing action particularly caught Hale's attention because it matched the description of how the perpetrator might have carried Liam out of the yard without wanting anyone to see. After fully documenting this, Hale asked Harvey to precisely describe the sound of the truck's engine and received information. The engine started unevenly, seemingly due to worn spark plugs or an unstable fuel line, matching the description from Line 1 witnesses. From the grocery store, Hale moved to the gas station just over a mile away. The attendant, a young man named Grady, confirmed seeing the gray pickup truck stop at pump number 2, but not refuel. The driver only paused for a few dozen seconds before leaving in the direction leading back toward the Foster home area. Grady couldn't confirm whether the driver was male or female since the doors didn't open, but the time was around 4:50 or 4:55 p.m., aligning almost perfectly with the timeline Hale was building. Notably, Grady said the truck stopped not for any mechanical reason. It paused as if the driver was debating whether to pull in or not, then decided to leave quickly. This behavior heightened the possibility that the perpetrator was scouting directions or avoiding attention. At the small diner over 4 miles away, Hale spoke with the owner, who reported no unfamiliar women stopping by that afternoon, but recalled seeing a gray pickup truck driving slowly past the diner around nearly 5 p.m. She didn't remember the license plate clearly, but was certain the truck had a scratch on the left side, a detail repeated from Lola's statement. Though unable to identify the driver, this information helped solidify the truck's travel route. When Hale reached the nearby auto repair shop, the mechanic confirmed no one had come in for repairs during that time frame, but he heard the weak engine sound as a gray pickup truck drove past. This matched the description of an older or poorly maintained vehicle. After compiling all Line 2 witness statements, Hale began cross-referencing them with what had been gathered from Line 1 in the scene. The data from the grocery store aligned almost perfectly with the perpetrator's movement pattern. The woman appeared before 5 p.m., displayed tense behavior, left the store quickly, headed toward the gray pickup truck, and started the engine to depart immediately. The departure time from the grocery store coincided with when a neighbor heard a vehicle near the Foster home, reinforcing the assumption that the woman was the driver or in control of the vehicle at that moment. The truck stopping at the gas station without refueling raised the possibility that the perpetrator was seeking directions or checking for followers. The details of the weak engine start, red dust on the body, and left side scratch repeated across multiple statements helped Hale establish that this was not just any truck, but a vehicle with consistent identifying features. Moreover, the timing of the truck's appearances in Line 2 and the residential area matched the average travel speed of a small pickup on dirt roads. This allowed Hale to rule out the possibility of 2 similar gray trucks appearing in the same time frame, an improbably large coincidence. Hale continued analyzing the woman's behavior, buying a blanket, concealing something, repeatedly looking toward the door, and leaving hurriedly formed a chain of unusual actions in a normal context, but became significant when linked to Liam's disappearance scene. Although at the time of leaving the store, the woman could not yet have been carrying Liam, her behavior still suggested psychological instability or the execution of a specific plan. Hale determined that the Line 2 witnesses provided 3 strong leads: confirmation of the unfamiliar woman's existence, confirmation of a vehicle matching the tire tracks at the scene, and confirmation of the vehicle's movement timeline before the abduction occurred. This was the first time in the investigation that Hale had a continuous chain of data connecting the scene, the residential area, the commercial zone, allowing him to officially prioritize the unfamiliar woman and gray pickup truck as key elements for further investigation. After completing information collection from the commercial area witnesses, Hale returned to the residential neighborhood to process the final group of witnesses within close radius of the Foster home. The children playing in the area, the afternoon Liam disappeared. This was a special witness group because their young age often made memory, description, and chronological sequencing unstable, but they sometimes observed details adults overlooked. Hale treated this as a supplementary source, not primary evidence, and proceeded by interviewing each child separately to avoid statements being influenced by suggestion or unconscious repetition. The group consisted of 4 children playing in the front yard of a house about 3 doors down from the Fosters, plus 1 boy living at the end of the dirt road who frequently rode his bike through the area. Hale started with the oldest boy in the group, around 10 years old, as accuracy tends to increase with age. He said that between nearly 4 p.m. and after 5 p.m., the children were playing catch and chasing each other in the area between his yard and the open lot in front of the Foster home. However, he didn't see any stranger enter the Foster yard and didn't recall any particular vehicle sounds because vehicles passed by all afternoon as usual. This statement was general but held no direct value for the disappearance time due to lack of specific observations. The second child, an 8-year-old girl, said she saw a shadowy figure near the Foster home's fence line around nearly 4 p.m. But when Hale asked how long the figure stood there, whether the hair was long or short, or if it was an adult or child, she couldn't describe it. The statement was deemed compatible with Ruth's line 1 account, but low in authenticity since the child didn't see clear details. Hale noted it, but did not prioritize. The third child, a 6-year-old girl, gave an even vaguer account, saying she heard someone call baby or come here, but wasn't sure where the sound came from or the exact time. When Hale asked if the voice sounded like an adult or child, she hesitated and changed her answer several times. This was a typical young child statement easily influenced by imagination or echoes from nearby yards. Hale classified it as Class C, reliability low, only to be used for cross-checking sound elements with other sources if needed. The fourth child, a 5-year-old boy, said that while riding his bike past the front of the Foster home, when the sun was still bright, he saw a gray vehicle parked near the fence. But when asked for more details, vehicle length, people inside, direction it faced, he couldn't answer and seemed confused, possibly because the memory wasn't truly clear, or the sighting time was unrelated to the disappearance. Hale noted the account, but rated reliability low due to inability to pinpoint time. The final witness was Tommy, 7 years old, whom Hale had heard mentioned in neighbor statements. Tommy said he heard baby come here while playing near his house door at a time he believed was when the sky was less sunny. But when Hale asked if he heard that voice right before hearing a vehicle, Tommy hesitated and revised that it might have been while I was running toward the house, a completely different time. Tommy, changing details with each question, indicated inconsistent memory, possibly due to fear when after learning of Liam's disappearance or influence from adult accounts afterward. However, Hale still noted the relative time marker that an unusual sound occurred before about 5 p.m. since the sound element could align with the perpetrator moving along the fence. After gathering all child statements, Hale performed the critical step, checking internal consistency and cross-referencing with line 1 data and scene evidence. He created a classification table based on 3 factors: direct observation level, detailed description ability, and alignment with physical evidence. He billig and fid among the children. No statement reached high reliability. The oldest boy's account was ranked medium because it fit the general sequence despite lacking details. The remaining 3 were ranked low due to lack of specificity. However, within those vague accounts, Hale identified 2 usable elements. First, multiple children heard noises or vague calls between 4:30 and nearly 5 p.m. Second, a few remembered seeing a shadowy figure or gray vehicle in the area, though without specific timing. When cross-referenced with adult witnesses and scene traces, these elements were insufficient for conclusions, but helped Hale reinforce the overall time frame. 4 o'clock, 5 p.m. was the period with multiple unusual signals around the Foster home. This aligned with the assessment that the perpetrator was present in the area before committing the act and may have observed from afar before approaching Liam. Ultimately, Hale determined that the child witness group provided no direct evidence but served a supporting role in establishing the sound environment and indirect presence of a stranger that afternoon. He clearly noted the usage level for child statements only for supporting the time frame and checking overlaps with other evidence sources, never as primary basis for identifying the perpetrator. This reliability threshold classification ensured child statements did not introduce noise into subsequent analysis steps, while preserving the value of small details that could aid in reconstructing events around Liam's disappearance. Right after completing the classification of child statements and establishing the peripheral timeframe of the incident, Hale moved to deploy the first ground search phase, a critical step to rule out the possibility that Liam left the yard on his own or was injured nearby. Though scene traces strongly lean toward an abduction hypothesis, Hale maintained standard procedure. A comprehensive search of the radius around the scene must be conducted before final conclusions. He mobilized 3 additional deputies from the sheriff's office, combined with local volunteers, dividing into teams sweeping north, east, southwest, focusing on points Liam could access if he crawled or was set down and left. Hale specifically requested K-9 units from the Seminole County K-9 unit to track scent from the stroller and Liam's clothing prepared by Marjorie. The K-9s were released in the Foster yard and immediately followed a consistent direction from the stroller out to the gate, then stopping at the edge of the dirt road, where Hale had marked deep tire tracks during the initial scene survey. This was a notable signal because if Liam had crawled out on his own, the dog would detect a scent trail with a ground path or through grass, but here the scent stopped abruptly, consistent with the pattern of a child being lifted into a vehicle. Hale did not stop at the K-9 indication, but continued the expanded ground sweep. North of the Foster home was a wide brown field, with 2 dry wells abandoned after a drought season. The search team used ropes, flashlights, and a long metal pole to check the well bottoms, but both were dry and showed no signs of recent access. The northern edge led to a small ditch running to a dry creek bed. This was a concern for Hale if Liam had been set down or crawled that way and faced danger. However, sweeping along the ditch revealed soft soil with no handprints, knee marks, or slide traces. The team concluded no signs Liam had passed through. East was low grassland, extending about a mile to the Miller farm fence. Sparse vegetation made it easy to spot grass disturbance or slide marks. Deputies walked in a line spaced about 3 meters apart, scanning the entire surface. No new disturbances beyond pre-existing child play footprints, which were verified by timing and shape. South featured a dry creek and trees growing close to the bank. Dense canopy made trace detection harder. The K-9 was released again to sweep along the creek. This time, the dog showed no reaction to any new scent, circling back toward the Foster gate, reinforcing the initial hypothesis that Liam did not travel far from the yard in this direction. West bordered the dirt road leading to the neighborhood. The team checked under every bush, large tree bases, and any concealing objects. Hale required noting all new footprints for comparison with prior evidence, but found nothing beyond the search team's own prints and a few animal tracks. When checking small water ruts along the road, where child hand or footprints might remain if Liam had been there, the team concluded the ruts were undisturbed from before, similar to the creek and grassland. Every open direction Liam could have entered showed no corresponding movement traces for a 1-year-old. After about 2 hours of comprehensive sweeping, Hale expanded the search another mile along the dirt road. Soft soil sections easily recorded marks, but showed absolutely no slide or small footprints. Nearby residents were re-questioned about any wandering child, and all confirmed seeing no one beyond the usual playing children. For added certainty, Hale had the K-9 return to the starting point and track in reverse to account for the possibility the perpetrator circled the yard before taking Liam to the gate. This second sweep showed a completely consistent scent pattern from stroller to gate, then gone. No branches, no extended scent in any other direction. This clearly ruled out Liam leaving on his own, because if he had crawled to the road or into the eastern grassland or southern ditch, the K-9 would certainly follow the child's body scent for hundreds of meters. Hale noted the scent direction stability as the strongest evidence from the ground search. After essentially completing the outer sweep, Hale evaluated all results and categorized them into 3 groups: physical traces, environmental signs, and scent signals. These 3 data groups, when tightly compared with initial scene survey and line 1-2 statements, all led to the same conclusion: Liam could not have left the yard on his own, and there was no short distance he traveled without leaving traces. For a 1-year-old body, crawling or being set on the ground, would certainly leave hand or knee prints on the soft Oklahoma soil that afternoon. The absence of such traces indicated only two possibilities. Either Liam was carried directly from the stroller to the gate without touching the ground, or he touched the ground for too brief a time to leave marks. Combined with Liam's scent disappearing abruptly at the deep tire track location, where the K9 stopped, Hale concluded this was the point where the perpetrator placed the child in the vehicle. The ground search phase yielded no new search directions, but played an extremely important role. It absolutely ruled out the possibility of Liam wandering off, solidifying the argument that his disappearance was not an accident, but the result of external intervention, specifically being approached by a stranger and taken into a vehicle, leaving the area in a very short time. Immediately after the ground search team concluded and confirmed that Liam did not leave on his own, Hale moved to the next step in the process, collecting secondary evidence, items not directly in the Foster yard, but potentially related to the perpetrator's direction of movement or actions immediately before and after the abduction. The deputies had previously marked 3 suspicious locations during the search, including one of Liam's toys lying near the gate, a torn piece of fabric caught on the mesh of the fence on the right side, and a small piece of rubber with a distorted edge, suspected to be a tire fragment broken off when the truck accelerated away from the scene. Hall instructed that each piece of evidence be collected using gloves and separate storage bags to avoid cross-contamination, while clearly noting the time, location, and context of discovery. The first toy examined was the small wooden horse that Liam often held while in his stroller. Marjorie confirmed it was his favorite toy, and it was never taken out of the yard because Liam did not yet carry toys far. The fact that the wooden horse was lying about 2 meters from the gate and slightly tilted on the ground suggested it likely fell during the perpetrator's hasty carrying of Liam from the stroller toward the gate. Hall examined the fall angle of the item. The tilt was toward the right, near the area of the fence where he had found compressed soil at the primary scene. This implied the perpetrator may have approached from the right side of the stroller and then circled around before leaving. The fall pattern and stopping point of the toy, not too far from the gate, but also not right next to the stroller, indicated a light impact force consistent with Liam being lifted quickly, causing the toy to drop from his hand. There were no child footprints or slide marks around it, aligning with the conclusion that Liam did not touch the ground. The second piece of evidence was a torn scrap of gray-blue fabric, about 3 centimeters long, with coarse weave, caught on the mesh of the fence toward the southeast side of the yard. The fabric scrap was about 4 meters from the stroller and close to the shaded spot where Hale had discovered the compressed soil area. This was the area Ruth had reported seeing a shadowy figure standing around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Upon close inspection, Hale noted that the torn edge of the fabric was pulled and frayed rather than naturally broken. This indicated it was snagged when the person wearing it brushed against the fence while moving along the edge of the yard. The gray-blue color matched the description from the route 2 witnesses of the strange woman's clothing at Harvey's grocery store, a thin, dark-colored jacket, somewhat faded, worn and old. Hale could not immediately confirm it was from the jacket of the woman who bought the scarf at the store, but the similarity in color and material led him to flag it as an important intermediate piece of evidence. The third piece of evidence, the small rubber fragment found at the road edge, 3 meters from the Foster gate, was the one Hale assessed as having the highest technical value. The rubber piece was about 1 centimeter thick, with a cross-groove tread pattern typical of tires common on small trucks from the early 1950s. The edge of the rubber showed signs of tearing from sudden pressure, like when a wheel spins forcefully during acceleration, especially on soft red dirt. When placing the rubber fragment next to the tire mark Hale had measured earlier, the groove structure matched the type of unevenly worn tire, a characteristic repeated multiple times in testimonies from Route 1 and Route 2 about the gray truck with a weak engine and old body. Finding the rubber fragment at the point where the vehicle departed, exactly where the tracking dogs lost the scent, led Hale to consider it the strongest physical evidence proving the perpetrator used a vehicle to transport Liam away from the scene. After collecting all three pieces of evidence, Hale organized another sweep of the entire surrounding area to ensure no details were missed that could cause interference or lead to errors in analysis. A few small items like candy wrappers, empty cans, and scraps of paper were found, but quickly ruled out because they did not match the timeline, were unrelated to the woman's behavior or the gray truck, and did not fit the perpetrator's path. Hale was very cautious about exclusions because he knew a single misplaced piece of evidence could distort the overall case. When reanalyzing each piece of evidence alongside the information from the grocery store and gas station witnesses, Hale began linking them into a logical chain. The toy dropped near the gate indicated Liam was carried in a hurried situation, consistent with the woman's anxious demeanor when leaving the grocery store. The gray-blue fabric scrap matched the clothing description and was located exactly at the shaded spot with compressed soil, suggesting the person may have been observing the Foster yard before direct approach. The rubber fragment matched the vehicle type, described by multiple witnesses, confirming the direction of movement and the acceleration mechanism right after the perpetrator left the scene. Beyond the matches between evidence and testimonies, Hale emphasized the timing factor. Each collected piece of evidence fell within the plausible time frame of the incident. The toy could only have dropped after Liam was lifted. The fabric snagged on the fence at the exact time the stranger appeared, according to Ruth, and the rubber could only have broken off during the vehicle's acceleration away from the gate, carrying Liam. These connections allowed Hale to solidify the overall model. The perpetrator arrived in the Foster area beforehand, moved along the fence, approached Liam at the moment the family was distracted, carried him out of the yard, dropping the toy, leaving the fabric scrap, and accelerating away, causing minor tire damage and deep tread marks. The collection and analysis of secondary evidence did not yield new clues about the perpetrator's identity, but reinforced the chain of events in a consistent manner. Hale did not rule out the possibility of coincidental evidence, but he had eliminated all exceptions to retain the three key elements directly tied to the described vehicle and the suspicious behavior of the strange woman. From this, he reached the most important conclusion of the secondary evidence survey phase. Everything aligned with the hypothesis that the perpetrator was the user of the gray truck, acting with intent and leaving the scene via a pre-calculated route. After the secondary evidence collection was completed and the overall picture of the events at the scene had become unified, Hale moved to the family vetting step, a mandatory process to rule out direct family involvement in Liam's disappearance. Although all evidence pointed to an external perpetrator, professional protocol required not overlooking the family factor before proceeding to broader investigative directions. Hale began by reconstructing the timeline for each family member during the afternoon of the incident. For Henry, his work schedule at the oil rig was verified through time cards and at least 7 co-workers on the same shift, all confirming he left work around 6 o'clock after Liam had already gone missing. For absolute certainty, Hale requested checks of the rig's truck logs and Henry's position throughout the shift, cross-referenced with the time he could have driven home. The conclusion showed it was completely impossible for Henry to have left the rig during the incident time frame. This data was classified as strong alibi evidence. For Marjorie, her timeline was built from her own statement, Sarah's statement, and practical elements at the scene. Marjorie left the yard to go to the kitchen for a bottle, estimated at no more than 30 seconds. When Hale timed the distance from the stroller to the kitchen and back, he confirmed the timing was entirely feasible. If Marjorie were considered involved, she would have needed enough time to carry Liam to the road herself, create the tire marks, place the tire fragment, and stage the scene, something impossible in such a short period, especially with no adult footprints matching her shoes at the scene. Additionally, Marjorie's mental state when reporting to police and throughout interactions was closely observed. Hale detected no signs of avoidance, inconsistencies, or concealment, common indicators in family-perpetrated cases. She was consistent in recounting events despite being in panic, and this consistency was corroborated by both Sarah and objective elements in the yard. Sarah was the only witness who saw Liam right before he vanished, making her statement crucial. However, since Sarah was only 9 years old, Hale evaluated her account using child psychology methods, assessing stress levels, recall errors, and susceptibility to adult questioning influence. Sarah recounted the events with key points consistent across all interviews. She was picking up toys while Liam was in the stroller, heard a distant engine sound, and did not see a stranger enter the yard directly. Hale compared Sarah's statement to the physical evidence and found no contradictions. The toy dropped near the gate matched her description that Liam was still holding it just before she bent down. Her not seeing anyone enter was logical because the perpetrator's approach from the right fence side was in a blind spot for the child's view. Moreover, Sarah's anxiety, fear, and guilt were natural child responses to suddenly witnessing a sibling's disappearance, with no signs of deliberate concealment. Hale noted that when asking the same question at different times, Sarah only varied minor emotional details but kept action-related elements unchanged. This reinforced the authenticity of her statement. Another factor helping rule out family involvement was the absence of any staging signs at the scene. If a family member had faked the scene, there would typically be inconsistencies like unusual footprints, unnatural object fall directions, or drag marks. But here, all traces aligned with a natural sequence: perpetrator approaching from the fence, carrying Liam, dropping the toy, then heading to the gate and vehicle. There were no physical signs of family interference in the yard before Hale arrived. After analyzing each factor related to the 3 directly present members, Hale prepared a family clearance document in 3 parts: timeline checks, psychological behavioral assessments, and cross-references with evidence. All 3 sections reached the same conclusion. No data indicated the Foster family was directly or indirectly involved in Liam's disappearance. Furthermore, motive, the most critical factor in family cases, was entirely absent here. The Foster family had no severe financial difficulties, no signs of internal conflict, and all statements described strong bonds among members, especially Henry and Marjorie's affection for Liam. Upon completing the file, Hale officially cleared the family from suspect status. This not only narrowed the investigation scope, but also eliminated a potentially distracting direction if not addressed early. More importantly, verifying the family's alibi allowed Hale to focus all resources on the external perpetrator direction, where all evidence and statements were increasingly converging. Immediately after the Foster family was cleared from suspect status, Hale entered a critical phase, building the initial suspect profile based on all data collected from the previous 9 sections. This was the stage where he had to synthesize every disparate element: physical traces, witness statements, timing and location, scene behavior, into a clear enough profile to narrow the investigative scope. First, Hale reviewed all data on the perpetrator's behavior. The scene sequence showed the perpetrator approaching from the fence, observing for a period, choosing the exact moment Marjorie left the yard, quickly carrying Liam, and exiting the area in seconds. No loud noises, no items left behind, no footprints showing hurried movement, no stumbling or signs of confusion. All indicated purposeful action, prior preparation, and good knowledge of the yard layout and observation gaps. This led Hale to initial psychological traits. The perpetrator was highly unlikely to be impulsive, but rather calculated, capable of monitoring the target and adjusting behavior to changing situations. Regarding movement, Hale used results from tire mark identification and scent loss at the gate. The perpetrator definitely used a vehicle. Unevenly worn tires, deep marks on the right side, cross-groove treads indicated an older truck, common early 1950s model, likely a Chevrolet Advanced design or similar. Route 2 witnesses described large scratches on the left side, gray body covered in red dust. These details matched signs of wear on vehicles, frequently driven on dirt roads without regular maintenance. Weak engine, uneven running sounds, noted by multiple witnesses, reinforced the suspect vehicle characteristics. Thus, in the suspect profile model, the vehicle had to be a small gray older truck in long-term use, with left side scratches, uneven tire wear, and unstable engine noise. This combination was specific enough to circle in nearby counties, as such trucks were typically owned by local laborers, long-haul drivers, or independent individuals. Regarding suspect gender, Hale considered the Harvey's grocery store statements, where a young woman bought a scarf and displayed tense behavior, repeatedly looking out the door. Witness Lola described the woman heading toward the gray truck. Although no direct evidence linked this woman as the perpetrator, the matches in vehicle and timing forced Hale to include female gender in the profile. However, he noted the possibility of a male driver or two people traveling together. Still, the Route 2 witness descriptions remained the strongest clue for a strange woman's presence in the area just before the incident. So the initial profile would include a female branch as suspect of interest. Next, Hale analyzed the approach behavior. The person stood at the fence long enough to compress the soil, observing the Foster family without drawing attention. This demonstrated good observation skills, calculation, and no forceful entry signs. A stranger unfamiliar with the area would struggle to approach so confidently without detection, given the sparse population around the Foster home and yard. This led to two possibilities. Either the perpetrator had passed this dirt road multiple times, or had reason to believe the area near the Foster home was low traffic. Considering data from the children's group and Route 1, Hale assessed high likelihood of prior distance surveillance. The observation combined with timing family distraction was a hallmark of targeted child abduction cases of that era, especially when the perpetrator saw an opportunity to carry the child quietly. Regarding age, Mandy, Route 2 witness described the woman at the grocery store as about 30-35 years old, small build, dark brown hair. Lola estimated similarly. Hale had no basis to confirm this woman was the perpetrator, but a young woman alone, driving an old truck, appearing tense within the event timeframe could not be ignored. The fence fabric color and the woman's jacket description both fell in the gray-blue range, adding similarity. For motive, Hale listed possibilities based on contemporaneous child disappearance cases, impulsive act by someone in psychological crisis, desire to replace a lost child, possessive behavior toward young children, or deeper personal conflict motive. However, for the Foster family, no data pointed to family disputes, legal issues, or distant relatives. No threatening letters, no clear long-term stalking. This ruled out personal dispute motives. Based on preparation, timing selection, and suitable vehicle, the most fitting suspect group was those with possessive motive or child substitution pattern, wanting a young child for psychological or family reasons. From this, Hale narrowed focus to women aged 25-40, able to own or access an old truck, often traveling alone, showing instability or tension near the incident time. The subject might live within a 20-mile radius of Seminole or be a frequent passerby, such as temporary workers, seasonal employees, or short-haul drivers. When organizing factors into a model table, Hale obtained suspect profile version 1 as follows. Female gender age 25-40, traveling in older small gray truck, tense observant stealthy approach behavior, possessive or child replacement motive, possibly living in or familiar with the area. This profile did not identify a specific person, but was a significant narrowing from the initial stage, when all possibilities were open. Hale concluded that suspect profile version 1 served as the foundation to shift the investigation to screening individuals matching this pattern in relevant geographic areas. When the initial suspect profile had been established with a focus on an old gray pickup truck, Hale moved on to the step of analyzing tire tracks to narrow down the vehicle type. This was one of the most critical technical tasks of the 1950s, when police lacked modern tools and had to rely on experience, guidebooks, and tire identification manuals. Hale began by comparing the tread pattern recovered at the Foster home gate with catalogs of common tire types from that decade. The tread had a slight V-shape, pressed at diagonal angles in both directions, characteristic of tires designed for light trucks or pickups. Sedan tires from that era typically had wavy or parallel treads, while heavy trucks had much deeper and wider treads. The moderate width of this tread, matching the axle size of small trucks, allowed Hale to rule out all sedans or passenger cars entirely. Based on the tread pattern, Hale consulted the 1953 technical manuals from Firestone and Goodyear, the two most common tire brands in Oklahoma at the time. The pattern at the scene matched two types: the Goodyear all-weather truck tire and the Firestone utility grip, both commonly used on small Chevrolet advanced design trucks and certain contemporary GMC models. For confirmation, Hale measured the exact width of the tire tracks. The figures obtained matched the specifications for tires used on Chevrolet 3100 and 3600 series trucks, produced from 1951 to 1953. These were popular models in Oklahoma due to their ease of repair, low cost, and preference among workers and farms. Additionally, the tracks at the scene showed uneven wear. The right side imprint was deeper than the left. This often occurred when a vehicle had been driven for long periods on rough dirt roads, or when the suspension had become slightly misaligned over time. This characteristic also aligned with the older vehicle described in witness statements from Route 2. From this, Hale narrowed the suspect vehicle to a Chevrolet Advanced Design 3100-3600s from 1951, 1953, or an equivalent GMC. This was a significant breakthrough because it allowed him to shift from a vague description to a specific group of vehicles that could be checked through regional registration records. Seminole County at the time still maintained manual vehicle registration files by year, including owner information, addresses, and vehicle types. Hale requested retrieval of all small Chevrolet and GMC trucks registered from 1951 to 1953 within a 20-mile radius. The initial list included over 40 vehicles, but he immediately excluded those confirmed to be still in their owner's possession and used daily. Individuals with clear alibis or no suspicious factors. Some vehicles were registered to large households and used for farm work, with multiple drivers rotating. However, most of these did not match the gray description or show any unusual signs. Hale continued filtering based on paint color. Among the 1951-1953 vehicles in the area, 11 were registered as gray or silver. However, several of these had been seen on the day of the disappearance in other locations, per owner or neighbor statements. After further exclusions, the list narrowed to 5 vehicles. For each, Hale checked usage history, vehicle condition, and mobility on the day of the incident. One was confirmed by its owner to have been in a repair shop all week and inoperable. Another belonged to a large family where the truck had not left the farm during the season. The remaining 3 were in the potentially related category, 2 whose owners reported not clearly remembering whether they had used it that afternoon. The third registered to a young woman living alone near the White Rock area, about 12 miles from the Foster home. Hale focused on these 3 vehicles and began cross-referencing witness descriptions of the vehicle. Details needing to match included gray color, large scratch on the left side, weak or uneven engine sound, presence in the area, 5 miles from the scene before or after the incident. When interviewing the owners of the first 2 vehicles, Hale noted something important. Both lacked a left side scratch and had normally functioning engines. Moreover, neighbors confirmed seeing both trucks parked at home during the time overlapping Liam's disappearance. Thus, they were completely ruled out. The third vehicle was the noteworthy one. It was registered as a Chevrolet 3100 silver gray 1952 model. The color matched witness descriptions. When Hale checked maintenance records and vehicle condition, he discovered the engine had a note about minor combustion chamber issues, which could cause uneven popping sounds, perfectly matching the gas station testimony. Additionally, a report from the previous year indicated a minor left side collision, creating a long scratch, matching Lola's description from the grocery store. The final detail that particularly caught Hale's attention: the owner was a young woman working part-time at a store in a neighboring town, frequently traveling between nearby areas in this very truck. Although this information was not enough to conclude she was the suspect, the matches in model, color, scratch, engine, and activity timing led Hale to place the vehicle and its owner on the official suspect vehicle list. By the end of this analysis phase, Hale created a focused list with 3 groups: vehicles definitively excluded, vehicles potentially related but needing further verification, and the highest suspect group, consisting of the aforementioned 1952 gray Chevrolet. Based on tire tracks, witness descriptions, and registration data, identifying the suspect vehicle had reduced the investigation scope to a feasible level for moving to screening vehicle owners and those who could access the vehicles at the time of the incident. After narrowing the suspect vehicles to the 1951, 1953 Chevrolet group, particularly the 1952 gray Chevrolet 3100, with features fully matching witness descriptions, Hale began the next step: screening individuals who could have driven or accessed these vehicles at the time of Liam's disappearance. His goal was to compile an initial suspect list of 7 people, vehicle owners, regular users, or those who could have borrowed, rented, or accessed the vehicle that afternoon. The process started with the list of gray vehicles in the area, the 3 not fully excluded from the previous phase. Each vehicle corresponded to 1 or 2 regular drivers, expanding the list to 8 individuals, but after verifying with homeowners, Hale excluded 1 due to a clear alibi, reducing the list to the 7 most suitable for in-depth evaluation. Hale created an information table for each person, including name, age, address, family connections, employment history, most recent vehicle use, behavior, or mental state noted by neighbors, along with data related to their activities on the day of the incident. The first suspect was Tom Redding, 32 years old, owner of a small farm more than 14 miles from the Foster home. Tom owned a gray Chevrolet 3100, but claimed not to have used the truck on the day of the incident. Hale checked the alibi through statements from Tom's wife and 2 neighbors who frequently visited the farm. All confirmed Tom was home all afternoon, repairing a chicken coop roof with his brother. Additionally, Tom's truck had fresh paint on the right side, no left side scratch as described by witnesses. There was also no fresh red dirt under the chassis, indicating the truck had not left the farm that day. Tom was completely ruled out. The second suspect was Wallace Green, 41 years old, a delivery driver on a fixed route between Seminole and Kanawha. Green drove a company truck, but occasionally borrowed his cousin's 1953 Chevrolet for personal errands. Hale interviewed Wallace and cross-checked work records. Wallace had a signed delivery receipt in Kanawha at exactly 5 p.m., the time Liam was determined to have gone missing. The recipient employee and store manager both confirmed Wallace's presence on time. Travel time from Kanawha back to the Foster neighborhood area took at least 38 minutes, and even driving fast could not reduce it below 30 minutes. Thus, Wallace could not have been at the scene. The third suspect was Doris Caldwell, 29 years old, the only woman on the list owning an old gray truck and living alone within 15 miles of the Foster home. She worked at a sewing shop in the opposite town and frequently used the truck for commuting. However, when Hale examined the timeline, Doris provided a reliable alibi. She was working the afternoon shift at the shop, with 3 customers confirming purchases and repairs between 4 p.m. and nearly 6 p.m. The store manager also confirmed Doris was present continuously and did not leave work. Doris's truck had a darker gray paint than witness descriptions, and her tires were newly replaced in the spring, not matching the unevenly worn tracks at the scene. There were many coincidences that initially drew attention to Doris, but the clear data led Hale to remove her from the list. The fourth suspect was Rayford Mills, 37 years old, an oil field worker who usually drove a company vehicle but often used his brother's old 1952 Chevrolet on days off. Rayford had a minor record for disorderly conduct in bars, but no history of violence involving children. On the afternoon of the incident, Rayford claimed to be preparing for the evening shift. Arriving at the rig starting at 4:30 p.m., Hale checked timesheets, rig logs, and supervisor statements. All confirmed Rayford's presence on time. The rig was located more than 25 miles from the Foster home. Impossible to travel to and from in the 5 o'clock, 5:10 window. The vehicle Rayford used that day was the company truck, not the gray Chevrolet. The suspect vehicle was instead being used by his brother for hauling, who had verified evidence of being in another town at the time. Rayford was ruled out. The fifth suspect was Ken Whitmore, 28 years old, a single man living in the suburbs and described as reclusive. Whitmore owned a 1951 silver GMC, quite similar to witness vehicle descriptions, but his truck lacked a left side scratch. When Hale inspected the vehicle, Whitmore's GMC engine ran steadily with no weak popping. Moreover, Whitmore's neighbors confirmed he usually stayed home in the afternoons to care for his ill mother. Hale verified this statement and confirmed a nurse visited Whitmore's mother around 5 p.m., exactly the time of the incident. The nurse confirmed Ken was home, creating a solid alibi that forced Hale to exclude Whitmore. The sixth suspect was Bessie Turner, 34 years old, a woman living about 5 miles from the commercial area. Although she did not own a truck, she could borrow her brother's 1952 gray Chevrolet. However, when Hale interviewed her, Turner stated she was taking her son to a clinic near town that afternoon. Clinic records confirmed her presence at 4:20 p.m. and departure at 5:30 p.m. This alibi was rated average, but sufficient for exclusion when considering geography. Her brother's truck was being used at a job site more than 18 miles from the scene, confirmed by 2 co-workers. Thus, Turner had no vehicle and no ability to be in the area. The seventh suspect, and the one Hale paid the most attention to, was the owner of the 1952 gray Chevrolet, with a left side scratch and unstable engine, fully matching wrote 2 witness descriptions. This person was a 31-year-old young woman living near White Rock. However, when Hale verified the alibi, the results were more complicated than expected. The owner stated she had left home early in the afternoon to visit relatives in another town, where she had dinner and stayed until after the incident was reported on the radio. When checking the statement, Hale noted 2 concerning points. First, her departure time was inconsistent. Second, no relatives confirmed her arrival time. However, a neighbor confirmed seeing her truck leave around 2 p.m. but not return. This made her alibi inconclusive in terms of guilt or innocence. Nevertheless, when examining the truck's long-term travel history, Hale discovered it was frequently used for trips between White Rock and a town in the opposite direction from the Foster area, and neighbors noted she had never gone toward the road leading to the Foster neighborhood before. Thus, there was no evidence proving she had ever appeared near the Foster home. No witnesses saw this gray truck in the commercial area except at Harvey's grocery, and even that witness could not clearly confirm the license plate or driver's face. Therefore, despite many vehicle factor matches, Hale could not place her at the disappearance location and time. Tight analysis of all 7 individuals' timelines showed none were in the Foster home area between 4:45 5:15 p.m. Except the woman with the gray truck, but lacking data proving her travel direction matched the perpetrator's route. Environmental factors, timing, witnesses, and physical evidence created no strong enough intersection to retain anyone on the list. Thus, although initial coincidences placed the 7 on the suspect list, after detailed factor-by-factor analysis, Hale had to exclude them all due to lack of decisive connections between vehicle, behavior, and timeline. This screening did not yield a clear suspect, but it helped narrow the investigation by eliminating potentially misleading directions and confirming that the perpetrator was likely not a familiar local from the small communities around the area. Immediately after all 7 initial suspects were excluded from the investigation due to no data matching timeline, vehicle, or behavior, Hale had to accept an important reality: if the perpetrator was not among registered local vehicle owners or any easily accessible group around Seminole, then the high likelihood was that this was an interstate traveler, someone passing through, a temporary worker, or a person using unstable identities. From here, he decided to expand the investigation beyond Seminole County boundaries, activating interstate coordination procedures with neighboring areas potentially related to the perpetrator's travel route, especially southern Texas and western New Mexico, where federal highways connected directly to Oklahoma via old dirt road branches and highways running through Seminole County. Hale began by contacting the Texas Rangers, requesting assistance in checking reports of 1,950 S-era gray trucks appearing near border towns within 24 hours of Liam's disappearance. Texas provided a preliminary list of vehicles reported seen near local bus depots, rest stops, and motels along Highway 82. In this list were two notable cases: an old gray truck parked behind a motel that evening, but gone before the motel staff could see the plate, and another case of a strange woman carrying a large bundled blanket to the bus station, buying a ticket but leaving immediately without boarding. Both data points were not strong enough for identification, but occurred close to the incident timeframe, forcing Hale to continue cross-referencing. Simultaneously, he contacted New Mexico law enforcement, where many minor roads entered Oklahoma via Federal Highway 62. New Mexico sent back a report from a charity house in Clovis, where a young woman stopped to ask for food and blankets that night, carrying a small cloth bundle. No one saw the child's face, no clear description, but she was noted driving a silver truck with a left side scratch, matching the Harvey's grocery description. Hale reviewed all this data and requested a map of gray truck sightings within 150 miles of Seminole, forming a potential perpetrator travel belt in the first 6 to 12 hours after the kidnapping. The next step, Hale expanded to lodging facilities on the list of motels and inns in the two neighboring states. He sent information requests to over 30 facilities within a 200-mile radius, focusing on roadside motels with unusual transient guests or registrations under hard-to-verify names. Data returned from Texas highlighted a motel receipt in Wichita Falls, a town over 110 miles south of Seminole. The receipt noted a woman checking in that evening under the name Ann Lewis, a name so common it was hard to verify, with a description of the guest carrying a bundled blanket. More importantly, check-in time, around 8:45 p.m., fully consistent with the time a perpetrator could reach Wichita Falls from Seminole, if leaving the scene near 5 p.m. and driving continuously. However, the motel did not record the license plate, and the woman left before sunrise without notifying the front desk. Hale continued screening lists of newly appearing children in social facilities in Texas and New Mexico in the 1-2 weeks following the event. Although adoption records then were not as strict as modern ones, local agencies still kept files on abandoned children, those left at churches or charity houses. Some records noted children from a few months to a few years old, but none matched Liam's age. However, a report from a convent in Amarillo noted a strange woman inquiring about placing a newborn earlier in the month, but leaving no name. Around the same time, the Amarillo bus station recorded a woman carrying a large blanket bundle, resembling a newborn, boarding a bus toward Santa Rosa, but disembarking after only one stop. No one clearly remembered her face, but the evasive behavior and erratic travel caused the report to be retained. Hale compared all this data to the perpetrator's travel pattern and realized, if the woman left Seminole southwest or south, the most logical route would be dirt roads connecting to the highway toward Wichita Falls, then branching to Amarillo or deeper into Texas to avoid tracing. He graphed timelines, linking the gray truck behind Wichita Falls motel event with the woman asking for blanket at Clovis Charity House and woman with blanket bundle at Amarillo bus station, recognizing all occurred within 30 hours of Liam's disappearance. This was a tight enough timeline chain that the possibility of the events involving the same person could not be ruled out. However, Hale could not stop at timeline matching. He began checking the identity Ann Lewis, the name used for the motel registration. Through Texas Rangers contacts, he verified no one by that name lived in the Wichita Falls area at the time, nor any matching driver's license or vehicle registration. This increased the likelihood it was a false identity. Texas investigators confirmed that fugitives, or those avoiding exposure, often used common names to evade checks. With this data, Hale noted, Ann Lewis =unverified identity, possibly perpetrators. When expanding checks on interstate traveling women lists, Hale requested comparisons of recorded descriptions with the grocery store woman's appearance. Petite build, brown hair, age 30, 35, tense demeanor, behavior concealing something in her arms. Among reports from Texas and New Mexico, 3 descriptions most closely matched: the woman at Wichita Falls Motel, the woman at Clovis Charity House, and the woman at Amarillo. No one saw the woman's face clearly, but all described someone under 5'5", tall, slim, or petite build, carrying something wrapped in cloth. These similarities created a repeating set of characteristics. Hale grouped all 3 descriptions into a comparison set, forming a patterned suspect, a repeating suspect model showing travel, behavior, and vehicle. Analyzing this pattern, Hale realized the perpetrator was likely not fixed locally, possibly living a nomadic life or seasonal work, using an old vehicle, and crossing multiple states, making tracing difficult. He concluded the perpetrator likely left Oklahoma immediately after the crime, using false identity, and his next target was finding a hidden identity or new route used by this person. The interstate investigation expansion did not yield immediate identification, but it created 3 key pieces: repeated appearances of a woman matching the description, use of false identity, Ann Lewis, and indicators of the gray truck's travel across Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, very soon after Liam vanished. This was the foundation for Hale to identify an interstate travel pattern, thereby shifting the investigation toward transient, non-fixed subjects hard to trace by conventional methods. The expansion of the investigation into Texas and New Mexico did not yield any specific suspect, but caused Liam's disappearance to spread beyond the Seminole area, and as information began appearing in local newspapers and then spreading to nearby towns, Hale had to confront a problem that almost all missing child cases of this era faced: the explosion of rumors, unverified statements, and hourly I saw reports, most of which came from unrelated people or those who had only heard second-hand accounts. Just 2 days after the press coverage, the sheriff's office received more than 30 calls from citizens claiming to have seen a woman with a scarf, a gray car with a child inside, or a suspicious man standing near a fence at various locations, dozens of miles from the scene. Most of these were speculative, with no overlapping details in timing or specific characteristics, but each tip had to be examined to avoid missing a lid. Hale quickly realized that if he continued handling each statement manually, the investigation would be severely overwhelmed by noise. He organized a tip classification board with 4 levels: credible tips, verifiable tips, uncertain but cross-referenceable tips, and noise tips. The majority of calls fell into the Class D category, where vague information or timing mismatches were temporarily deprioritized. He required the duty officer to log all calls into the classification board before forwarding them to him or the deputies for review, in order to reduce pressure and prevent backlog of unnecessary information. However, the surge in rumors did not come only from those calling the police station. In the neighborhood around the Foster home, the community began buzzing with all sorts of speculations. The perpetrator was a local, a drifter, an out-of-state person, someone familiar with the family, or even a family member, though Hale had completely ruled that out. The rapid spread of unverified information caused some people to panic and pressure the police to arrest someone, while others became so fearful that they restricted their children from going outside, altering daily routines. Some residents claimed to have seen strange things that afternoon, but when questioned further, these accounts were distorted by fear or confused memory. Hale had to balance not overlooking valuable information with preventing the spread of false rumors that could derail the investigation. He decided to hold a small community meeting, explaining the tip processing procedure and asking residents to provide only information they had personally witnessed rather than hearsay. Although the meeting helped reduce some direct rumors, the volume of noise information continued to increase through the press, which often ran headlines that led readers to assume the case was progressing or that police were hiding something. 4 local newspapers ran stories with high frequency, adding unverified assumptions, leading nearby towns to start sending in Liam sightings everywhere, from gas stations to supermarkets or churches. When Hale checked these reports, none matched the description or timeline of the case. The deputies had to spend many hours traveling between towns, chasing false leads, consuming significant resources. Some citizens even reported seeing a child resembling Liam, but could not describe details or had mistaken other children in the community. This forced Hale to issue internal guidelines that only reports with clear specifics, vehicle color, suspicious behavior, direction of travel, would be considered for Class A or B. In this context, Hale had to deal with enormous pressure from the community and especially the press. They demanded constant updates, answers, or investigative directions, even implying that police were delaying or not aggressive enough. Such articles made the public more anxious, generating more calls about baseless events, forcing Hale to spend time issuing corrections instead of actual investigation. The most concerning development was the emergence of statements like "might know who took Liam," but when interviewed, the sources were based only on neighbor rumors with no specific data. This reinforced Hale's certainty that much of the new information was just noise rather than operational value. Ultimately, when compiling the tips from this phase, Hale found no new direction that could push the case further. All potentially promising leads had been verified and led to no significant intersection between physical evidence, statements, and suspect vehicle movements. Although community involvement showed goodwill, most information was unreliable, more emotional than direct observation. Hale concluded that this phase yielded no new leads, and if not controlled well, misleading information could obscure the few truly valuable facts already scarce in Liam's disappearance. As soon as the wave of rumors and false reports began to subside, thanks to the information classification measures, Hale returned to reviewing the entire early phase file to ensure no procedural errors had derailed the investigation. The screening of suspects, tire track analysis, and federal expansion had not led him to a decisive intersection, forcing Hale to re-examine from the initial pieces of information, where even a small deviation could create large gaps in the overall file. When reviewing the statements collected from the day Liam disappeared, the first error Hale discovered was a misrecorded digit in a license plate number provided by a Tier 1 witness. Harold, the neighbor across from the Foster home, said he saw a gray pickup truck driving slowly past the house a few hours before the incident and vaguely remembered the last 2 digits as 57. However, the deputy taking the statement recorded it as 51. This seemingly minor discrepancy had major impact when Hale cross-referenced the plates with registered vehicles. The difference between 57 inches and 51 inches eliminated an entire group of potentially related vehicles. The list ending in 57 inches included 3 1952 Chevrolets registered outside Seminole, while the 51 inches list had no matching vehicles. This made Hale realize they had overlooked a potential vehicle group due to a single recording error. When rechecking the first day file box, he found the deputy's note in a separate folder, clipped among other witness files. It turned out the deputy had drafted it in pencil, then rewritten in ink, but in haste, the digit smudged and was misread during compilation. The second error discovered had even more serious consequences. A document from the commercial area witness line, specifically a receipt noting the time the strange woman left Harvey's grocery store, had been misfiled into an unrelated folder. This receipt accurately recorded the woman's payment time as 4:43 p.m., matching the timeline Hale built from Lola and Harvey's statements. However, because it was clipped among reports about vehicles in Kanawha, it was not included in the initial analysis. Hale reasoned that if the document had been filed correctly, he could have more clearly determined the woman's route from the store to the dirt road, narrowing the perpetrator's time frame and direction. This misplacement caused a critical timing lead to be overlooked in the key early phase. The third error was the most severe because it involved information that could have opened an entirely different investigative direction. In the list of guests at a small motel in Wichita Falls received from the Texas Rangers, there was a registration under the name Eleanor B., a name less common than Ann Lewis, but still generic enough to avoid attention. However, when the file was transferred back, the paper with this guest's name was stuck to the back of the Amarillo bus station list, causing the reviewer to miss that it belonged to the motel. Notably, the check-in time for Eleanor B. was 8:41 p.m., matching a possible perpetrator route from Seminole to Wichita Falls. Moreover, the guest description noted woman short brown hair, carrying a large scarf bundle, details matching Tier 2 witness descriptions and those in Clovis, New Mexico. Upon discovering the match, Hale realized this was the third golden lead overlooked due to filing error, and it could have been the key connecting the suspect woman's movement chain from Oklahoma to Texas. Missing the Eleanor B. guest also meant Hale lost the early opportunity to check the register, compare signatures, or question motel staff about her specific description while their memories were fresh. Instead of clear information, he now had only indirect description through a vague note, reducing the accuracy of the entire federal direction. When combining these three errors, misrecorded plate digit, misfiled timing receipt, and overlooked key guest, Hale concluded that the case had lost 3 golden leads in the very first days. Each error individually might not have been catastrophic, but chained together, they created large gaps in the file and prevented potential connections between witnesses, vehicles, and movement patterns from forming. These leads, if handled correctly at the time, could have helped Hale identify a specific vehicle, link the woman to the gray truck, or at least pinpoint the perpetrator's escape route more accurately. Hale noted in his log that this was not the fault of one individual, but the result of a limited manual system, handwritten files easily lost, papers misclipped, or digits misread. Nevertheless, in a missing child case, all these errors came at a cost. At the end of the review, Hale marked the 3 errors in red pen and added a brief note. 3 major pieces fell out of place when they were needed most. The error compilation did not yield a new investigative direction, but it gave Hale a clearer view of what the case had lost, and why the entire early effort had not brought him closer to the perpetrator. The discovery of 3 serious early-phase procedural errors led Hale to spend many days trying to piece back the remaining data fragments. But when everything was laid out on the table, he had to face the reality that no subsequent investigative direction was strong enough to continue pursuing the perpetrator. Tier 1 and Tier 2 witnesses provided no new information. The federal line, though noting some description overlaps, still lacked any identifying data. And the 3 missed golden leads could no longer be recovered because time had faded. Witness memories and traces at distant scenes were no longer retrievable. When cross-referencing the entire file again, Hale saw that every investigative line reached the same dead end, no intersection between physical evidence, witnesses, and movement data. Previous conclusions that the perpetrator was from outside the area, used false identity, traveled interstate, and left no direct identifiers, made the file a maze with many openings, but no real exit. With this complete impasse, Hale called an internal meeting to report the status. He explained to the deputies that unless a new lead emerged externally, the investigation could not advance without risking errors or wasting resources. In 1955, child disappearance cases without clear evidence often had to wait for chance signals, a coincidental report, someone recognizing a feature, or a physical discovery. But when all directions had been checked without results, procedure required shifting the file to investigation suspended or cold case status. Hale did this with clear reluctance, but he understood that continuing pursuit in an information vacuum would not only drain office manpower, but also create false hope for the Foster family, who had endured weeks of exhausting stress. The file was closed after more than 2 months of investigation and moved to the Unsolved Cases section of Seminole County. However, this status change was not just administrative, it carried deep psychological consequences for the Foster family. Henry, who from the start believed Liam would be found, began falling into prolonged silence, speaking little and becoming distant. He returned to work but lacked focus, to the point where colleagues had to cover shifts because he repeatedly zoned out, staring into space as if waiting for someone to appear. Marjorie collapsed more profoundly. She blamed herself for leaving the yard for just dozens of seconds and often stayed awake all night, hoping to hear Liam's footsteps or imagining his figure in the kitchen. Guilt gnawed at her daily, and no answers from police were enough to ease it. Sarah, though young, carried the deepest scar because she was closest to Liam at the time of disappearance. Sarah became withdrawn, quiet, avoided neighbors, and often steered clear of the yard area where her brother vanished. Not knowing where Liam was or if he was alive kept Sarah in prolonged anxiety, and that fear followed her into sleep every night. The community around the Foster home also underwent clear psychological changes. Residents became more suspicious of strangers, children were restricted from going out. Families started locking doors and adding latches, though it was rare before. Stories about not knowing who did it spread, changing the area's atmosphere entirely from before the incident. Liam's disappearance became a heavy topic whenever mentioned, and the investigation's silence only heightened the sense of helplessness. Hale, though required to follow procedure in closing the file, still felt it as a personal failure. He believed that in the very first days they had been very close to the answer, but the 3 critical errors and the explosion of noise had let that opportunity slip away. Though unspoken, Hale knew that once the file went cold, the chances of finding Liam would diminish year by year, and the emptiness in the Foster family would never be filled without a breakthrough lead from somewhere beyond his control. In the early 1960s, even though Liam Foster's missing person file had been moved to cold case status, the Seminole Sheriff's Office continued to receive sporadic reports from nearby towns, most coming from local residents or from other police agencies forwarded through the minimal information sharing procedures of that era. These reports all had one thing in common: sightings of a young woman accompanied by a small child, both traveling in an old gray pickup truck, typically from the early 1950s. However, each time information came in, it lacked the necessary elements to connect into a unified data chain. This meant they were simply filed as supplemental notes, not enough to reopen the case. The first notable report appeared in 1961 when an officer from Pontotoc County sent Seminole a record of a woman driving a silver gray pickup truck who showed up at the local produce market. The vendor said she was with a boy around 6-7 years old, smaller than average for his age, and with light brown hair. The woman was reserved, spoke little, and left quickly after buying a few essentials. No one remembered the license plate, and the witness descriptions were not specific enough to compare with the original records from Liam's abduction. When the Seminole office received this information, Hale, even though he was no longer directly handling the file, still reviewed the vehicle description but could not match it, because the model year was too common, and there were no matching features like scratches or worn tires, similar to the suspect vehicle from 1955. This report was therefore filed as unverified information. In 1963, in the town of Shawnee, local police recorded a similar case: a brown-haired woman with a child, driving a gray pickup that stopped at a gas station near the highway. The station attendant remembered that the woman seemed to avoid conversation, paid, and left quickly. Another witness said the boy looked somehow unfamiliar, but there were no signs of violence or clear suspicion. Since there were no new missing child reports in the area at the time, the information was forwarded to Seminole as a remote possibility. However, when Hale checked it, the data could not be matched because witnesses described the truck as having two small windows in the rear bed, a detail that did not match the 1952 Chevrolet 3100, the suspect model in the Liam case. Thus, the Shawnee report was also placed in the category of scattered information lacking sufficient reliability. By 1965, in Wichita Falls, the town that had appeared in the suspected travel route from 1955, another report was sent in. A woman identifying herself as Mrs. B visited a clothing store looking to buy clothes for a boy and saying that the boy had recently joined her family. The store employee remembered that the child looked quite thin and quiet, but when asked, the woman replied that he was usually shy with strangers. The employee had no suspicions at the time, but 2 years later, when the incident was mentioned again in Texas media, she reported the information to local police. However, by the time the data reached Seminole, it was too late to verify, as the store kept no records, and descriptions of the woman's and child's faces had faded over time. Additionally, the name Mrs. B was too generic and could not be matched to any data about Eleanor B that had appeared in the 1955 motel records, which was also just a handwritten name without identifying features. In the following years, scattered information came from various areas: a woman temporarily living in low-rent housing in the Texas Panhandle, a single mother moving between hired farm labor jobs, or a strange woman appearing at farmers' markets in New Mexico with a child of unknown origin. Each report shared similarities: a young woman with brown hair, an old gray truck, a quiet boy, and unstable travel patterns. But that very vague similarity was the biggest obstacle. No report provided a license plate, sharp identifying features, or specific location clues sufficient to reliably link back to the Liam file. More importantly, in the 1960s, data management systems between states were not standardized. Police offices operated independently, kept handwritten records, and cross-referencing information between counties or states relied entirely on mail or telephone communication, which was slow and prone to loss. There was no centralized database to connect descriptions of a 1950s gray truck in Oklahoma with similar vehicles appearing in Texas or New Mexico. As a result, the reports never converged in the same dataset. Hale once tried to create a manual tracking chart himself, entering each piece of information into a separate notebook and color-coding repeating features, but after a few years, these scattered data points still were not enough to form a linked pattern. Each report fell into one of three categories: descriptions too generic, timing too late for verification, or lacking physical evidence for connection. Furthermore, since most reports came from people who saw the woman and child from a distance, or only briefly for a few minutes, accuracy was always questionable. Conducting in-depth checks on each report was impossible, as the locations spanned 3 states, and the Seminole Sheriff's Office lacked the resources to send someone to verify every case. By the late 1960s, the Liam Foster file had accumulated nearly 20 scattered reports from 3 states, but none crossed the minimum operational value threshold to reactivate the investigation. No license plates, no collected tire prints, no specific names, no direct witness confirmation of criminal behavior. When reviewing all these reports, Hale concluded that although they created many surface similarities, they were still not strong enough to reopen the case at that time. The scattered data from the 1960s suggested that the perpetrator may have continued interstate movement, frequently changing residences and living in communities too transient to form any consistent tracking pattern. But at the same time, they also reflected a painful reality: the technology, data systems, and coordination mechanisms of that era were completely inadequate to connect scattered pieces of information into a seamless investigative thread. Thus, everything remained merely marginal notes in the file, not enough to lift the case out of its prolonged frozen state. Throughout the late 1960s, as the sporadic reports of a strange woman and a boy traveling across Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico led nowhere conclusive, Hale gradually shifted his focus from tracking people to analyzing the vehicle, the only element that repeatedly appeared despite time, information noise, and witness variability. When he compiled all the reports from 1955 through the end of 1969, into one table. One common denominator stood out more clearly than any other factor: the repeated sightings of an old gray pickup truck, often traveling alone, carrying a young woman and sometimes a boy. Notably, descriptions from multiple counties, states, and years overlapped on specific characteristics of this type of truck. This compelled Hale to conduct a systematic compilation, for the first time isolating the gray truck from all the noise related to the woman's identity or child information. Hale began by reviewing all the reports from Seminole County in 1955, the gray truck seen near the Foster home hours before Liam disappeared, the weak engine noise heard by Ruth and Harold, the distinctly right-leaning worn tire tracks, the piece of broken rubber found near the gate. These elements were recorded in the initial file and became the foundation for the entire subsequent analysis. When cross-referencing with the 1960s reports, Hale noticed that descriptions of the gray truck in other counties fell into two recurring patterns. 1. A gray truck driving slowly or parked alone near sparsely populated areas. 2. A gray truck appearing with a woman carrying a cloth bundle or a small child. In the 1961 Pontotoc report, the witness described a silver-gray truck, old body, noisy undercarriage, parked at the market then leaving quickly without a visible plate. In the 1963 Shawnee report, the gas station employee mentioned faded paint and scratches on the left side, matching the description from Harvey's Grocery in 1955. In Wichita Falls in 1965, the truck was described as dusty silver, exactly the faded gray-silver color of the Chevrolet Advanced Design line when the original paint wore off over time. Adding reports from Clovis, New Mexico and Amarillo, Texas, both describing an old gray truck, sometimes with a weak backfire, Hale realized something important, although witnesses could not clearly describe the plate, driver, or bed condition. The recurring old silver-gray uneven engine description appeared too many times to be mere coincidence. To strengthen this hypothesis, Hale expanded his analysis to vehicle registration data from the 1950s and 1960s. He knew that during this period, the Chevrolet 3100-3600 was the most common pickup model in rural Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico. However, not every model was originally gray-silver. Many trucks were repainted over time as they faded in the southern sun. In particular, light blue or blue-gray trucks after 10 years of use often faded to the silver-gray described by witnesses. This helped Hale realize that the suspect vehicle was not limited to original gray models, but could be one that had been repainted or faded over time. When examining reports on vehicle condition, Hale identified another key overlap. Many witnesses mentioned an uneven engine sound, misfiring, or slight vibration when idling. These were common symptoms of the 216 or 235 engines in 1950s Chevrolets when not regularly maintained. Even stronger right-side vibration could relate to offset suspension, matching the right-leaning tire wear he collected at the Foster home scene. Moreover, the travel belt he had mapped during the interstate investigation, from Seminole down to Wichita Falls and over to Amarillo, also had gray truck sightings within reasonable time frames. Although it was impossible to confirm that all these events involved the same vehicle, their appearance along the route the perpetrator likely took after fleeing made Hale even more convinced that the gray truck was not only the abduction vehicle, but also the center of an interstate movement pattern. When comparing the frequency of gray truck sightings to descriptions of the woman or child, Hale realized a crucial point. Descriptions of the woman and child varied greatly, blurred by witness memory, while vehicle descriptions were more stable, changing little over time, and noted by multiple people in different locations. This consistent vehicle description further supported the hypothesis that it was not random but a sign of the same vehicle continuously moving through multiple areas over nearly a decade. From the vehicle feature overlaps, Hale created a pattern recognition table with three elements: faded silver-gray color, old body with left side scratches, weak or uneven engine noise. When he cross-referenced this table with all reports from 1955 to 1969, he found that at least 9 reports across 3 states shared at least 2 of the 3 features. This was an extremely low probability for natural occurrence, as small towns in that era had diverse vehicles and rarely matched across states. After completing the comparison table, Hale noted in the file, the early 1950s gray pickup is the only element appearing consistently across all reports from the initial scene to scattered observations in the following decade. Though lacking identifying data, it is the central denominator of the event chain. This was a significant step forward, as it shifted the investigative focus away from witness ambiguity and towards something that could not change over long periods, the vehicle. Hale concluded that the gray pickup was not only the crime vehicle, but also an identification marker based on the perpetrator's travel pattern. The vehicle's appearances at fitting time-location points, with nearly identical physical descriptions, made it the sole dominant element of the entire file. Though it did not reveal identity, this denominator became the linking axis for all scattered clues, indicating that the perpetrator may have used the same vehicle for years without changing plates or official ownership, and moved within the Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico border region for many years after the abduction. Identifying this pattern, though not enough to reopen the case in the 1960s, still became the foundation for later generations of investigators to see something that the primitive data systems of the time could not recognize. The gray Chevy was not a minor detail, but the key to unlocking the entire case. In a small town in Smith County, Texas, where working families lived, scattered along dirt roads and residency registration was still lax in the late 1950s. There was a family named Briggs, living completely isolated from denser communities. This family was headed by a woman named Helen Briggs, widowed since 1956, and who had moved to the area with a boy she introduced as her firstborn. Helen had few neighborly ties, mostly surviving on seasonal hired work, cleaning rooms at motels, laundry services, kitchen help in small highway diners. When she appeared with the child, neighbors simply accepted her word, as in that era, few people investigated or questioned the origin of a child accompanying a single woman. The child was named Michael Briggs by her, with a birth certificate listing 1954, 1 year before Liam Foster's disappearance, and the birthplace filled in as Amarillo, but without any hospital record number or delivering doctor's name as was customary. No one asked questions because in rural border areas, life was fragmented and lost records were common. Michael grew up in a small 3-room wooden house with a tin roof at the end of a dirt road leading to Route 385. The Briggs place had no close neighbors, only one family nearly half a mile away. Platt, the man living on the nearest ranch, said Helen often drove an old silver-gray pickup with scratches on the left side of the bed. No one paid attention because old pickups were commonplace. Michael, around 4 or 5 years old, often played in the yard, fair-skinned light brown hair, smaller than other kids his age. A few neighbors said Michael was gentle but easily startled, sometimes clinging tightly to Helen when meeting strangers. Helen explained that he was sickly from birth and didn't like crowds. People believed her. No one looked closely enough to notice he bore no resemblance to Helen in any feature. When Michael reached school age, Helen enrolled him in a small elementary school using the handwritten birth certificate without any health agency stamp. Schools at that time did not deeply verify records. A child having a non-standard birth certificate was not unusual. However, from the first year, teachers began noticing inconsistencies in Michael's personal information. When asked about his birthplace, he said, "Oklahoma," contrary to the paperwork. When asked about previous names or relatives, Michael often replied, "I don't remember, I haven't met anyone," or just repeated what Helen said. He didn't know who his biological father was or where the Briggs name came from. At school, Michael learned more slowly than others in family-related memory tasks, but picked up visual and recognition subjects very quickly. Teachers thought he was more visual than verbal, but in reality, it was a sign that he lacked foundational memories from early childhood, as if his earliest years had not occurred in the environment Helen described. As he grew older, Michael frequently asked about his origins, but only received vague answers. Helen said he was born in Amarillo, but couldn't remember which hospital. She said his father died when he was a baby, but provided no photos. When Michael asked about relatives, she said they lived very far away, but named no one. Around 1962, when Michael was 7, the school organized an activity to collect paperwork to update student records under new state regulations. Teachers required parents to submit official birth certificate copies. Helen submitted the same old paper without embossed seal, record code, or hospital name. The school accepted it due to lack of verification systems, but a young teacher named Martha Clifford, newly transferred from Oklahoma City, noticed irregularities. The 1954 birth certificate looked more like a personally written document than one issued by a health agency. The mother's name section was in different handwriting from the child's name. The birth date format did not match common Texas standards from that time. Martha asked Helen about when she moved to Texas. Helen replied, 1956, but also said Michael was born in Texas before they moved to Texas, a clear contradiction. However, in resource-poor rural areas without data systems, unclear documentation was not enough for the school to suspect mother and child. As Michael grew, some behaviors continued to draw teachers' attention. When drawing family pictures, he never drew his father. When drawing his mother, he only drew her figure with a gray pickup. When drawing the house, he drew one with a small fence and a stroller, even though the Briggs home had no stroller. Martha, the only one who noticed this detail, asked him, "Where is that stroller?" Michael replied, "I remember it standing in front of my house." But the Briggs home had never had a stroller. Another sign emerged when Michael was 8. He had fleeting memories that Helen could not explain, such as an image of an older girl, laughter in the yard, the sound of a kitchen opening, or someone calling a name other than Michael. When he asked Helen about these memories, she always brushed them off, saying, "You dream too much," or "You read stories and imagine." Her avoidance made Michael feel even more different, but he lacked the words to name that feeling. As he entered his teenage years, teachers began noticing clearer mismatches. Michael had no baby photos, unusual for any family no matter how poor. All his photos started from around age 2 onward, and the 2-year-old photos looked very different from 3-year-old ones, as if the early period was filled in with later shots attempting to recreate childhood. In 1966, Texas implemented a new rule. Students had to provide vaccination certificates with confirmation from a medical facility. Helen could not produce this paperwork, and gave the excuse old records not kept. Michael was revaccinated as required, but when the nurse checked scars, she noticed he had already received some shots previously, following the Oklahoma vaccination schedule, not matching Texas schedules from that period. This was one of the strongest signs that Michael was not born where the birth certificate stated. Gradually, Michael matured in a mix of vague memories, half-true, half-false stories from the adoptive mother no one knew about, and paperwork that matched no system. He did not know that reports of a woman and child with a gray truck had appeared across 3 states. He only knew his life always had something off. Strange gaps, as if part of his life had been replaced with stories that did not belong to him. The older he got, the more he recognized the gap between what others recounted about childhood and his own real memory fragments. Especially the stroller image, a memory Helen never mentioned, yet it appeared in his mind like a misplaced piece. Michael Briggs continued his life in the shadow of a constructed identity, unaware that behind the small discrepancies shared by teachers, old vaccination scars, vague memories, were the first signs that he was not a Briggs from the start. But the child taken from Oklahoma in that brief moment in 1955, raised under a new name that no one connected to the unsolved disappearance. Turning 14, Michael Briggs, now Liam Foster under his new identity, began entering a phase where questions about his origins were no longer vague feelings, but became specific, clear, and increasingly urgent needs. The fragmented pieces in his memory, which had only appeared as faint flashes throughout his childhood, now started to take on clearer shapes. The image of a stroller. The sound of a little girl calling a name that wasn't Michael. The image of a house with a wider lawn than the narrow wooden house of the Briggs. And especially the familiar feeling every time he saw the map of Oklahoma during geography classes at school. These things did not align with the story. "You were born in Amarillo," that Helen always repeated, causing him for the first time to suspect that something in his life was not right. The turning point of doubt began with a simple task, filling out personal information for his high school records. When he reached the place of birth field, Michael paused longer than usual. Amarillo, he had been told since childhood to fill it in that way. But every time he wrote it down, he felt like he was writing about a place that didn't belong to him. The guidance teacher required a copy of the birth certificate, and Helen provided the exact old yellowed paper with the line "Amarillo, 1954, written in faded ink. This time, the new teacher, Mrs. Collins, required a certified copy from the health department or county office. Helen snapped, saying she couldn't get the paperwork because the hospital had closed, then demanded that the school accept the old one like every year. This caused no trouble for the school, which was used to handling incomplete records from poor families, but it made Michael feel once again that something was being hidden. When examining the paper closely, Michael noticed that the handwriting in the mother's name section, Helen Briggs, was sharper, newer than the rest of the lines. He had seen hundreds of papers over time and could easily recognize the difference between old handwriting and handwriting added later. That made him question, why did the mother's name section seem like it had been added? He carefully observed the birth date section, noticing something strange. The final digit 4 seemed to have been written with a different pen. For some reason, Michael began to feel that those words were not meant for him. He had never seen any other document recording his birth year, and Helen kept no photos of him before the age of 2. When Michael asked, "Why are there no photos of me as a baby?" Helen only replied, "Cameras were expensive back then, I didn't have the money." But Michael knew that most poor families still had at least one photo taken with a borrowed camera or a cheap studio. Helen's evasion only made him suspect more that some period in his life had disappeared from the records. The doubt turned into an urge when he was assigned a family history project, a task meant to encourage students to explore their ancestral origins. While classmates presented about their grandparents, family hometowns, lineages, and traditional stories, Michael could only write a few short lines. "I live with my mother. My father died when I was young. I have no photos of my grandparents." The teacher commented that the paper had too little information. Michael brought the assignment home and for the first time resolved to ask Helen until he got answers. But then, when he asked, "I want to know who my dad was," Helen looked at him as if cornered. Her eyes panicked and tense, emotions Michael had never seen in her before. She replied curtly, "You don't need to know. The past only brings pain." That very defensiveness turned Michael's doubt into a conviction that Helen was hiding something important. Another sign appeared when Michael needed to get a new library card. The library required an ID card or valid birth certificate. The staff examined his birth certificate and said, "This one has no record number. Do you have an official copy?" Michael brought that question home to Helen and received heavy silence in return. She only said, "They're just making it difficult. Just give them your student ID." But Michael knew that every valid birth certificate had a record number. The blank section on his was too obvious. Another event that reinforced the doubt was when the school required vaccination history to update health records. The school nurse noticed that Michael had a few vaccination scars in a style not common in Texas, especially a scar on the upper arm that was the injection method according to Oklahoma standards in the early 1950s. Michael didn't understand what that difference meant, but the nurse just said, "It looks like you were vaccinated in another state before coming to Texas." When Michael asked Helen again, she replied, "You're remembering wrong. You've never left Texas." With each question, Helen withdrew more, reacting like someone afraid of having their secret exposed. But that very reaction made Michael understand that the real answer lay behind her fear. Turning 15, Michael began recording the inconsistencies he observed: the strange birth certificate, lack of baby photos, different vaccination history, fragmented memories of the stroller, Helen's excessive reactions every time he asked about the past, and the absence of any family stories. In one accidental rummage through an old drawer, Michael discovered a gray-blue cloth, a coarsely woven fabric, worn over time. When holding it in his hand, he felt strangely as if he had seen it somewhere before. He asked Helen where the cloth came from, and she immediately snatched it away, saying curtly, "Don't rummage through my things." That reaction, rather than the cloth itself, made Michael understand that his past contained more secrets than he had ever thought. The more he noted down, the more he realized a large gap between the birth year on the papers and the first moment he had clear memories, as if his memories only began around the age of 2 or 3. Before that, everything was hazy, like an erased area. No memories of the hospital, no images of the first months of life, no stories about parents or grandparents. All of it was a void. That very void pushed Michael into his deepest phase of doubt. He didn't just want to know the truth, he needed it. Not to oppose Helen, but to understand who he was, why he wasn't like other kids, and why his past seemed cut off from his real life. By the end of that school year, Michael wrote in his diary, "If I wasn't Michael Briggs from the beginning, then who was I before that?" That was the first time in his life he directly questioned his own identity. A question that Helen had tried to avoid for over a decade. And from that moment, the need to understand his origins was no longer vague curiosity, but an uncontrollable action, an action that Michael knew would lead him to a truth Helen had never wanted him to know. The year Michael turned 16 was also the year Helen Briggs, the woman he had believed was his mother throughout his life, died after a prolonged fever. She passed away suddenly, leaving behind an old house, a few miscellaneous items, and a wooden box containing papers that she had always kept tightly locked. In the days cleaning up the rundown house before the local authorities took over, Michael discovered that box deep under the bed, covered in dust, and permeated with a moldy smell in every plank of wood. He unlocked it with the small key, hidden in an old metal box that Helen always carried with her. Inside were scattered papers, bills, letters, a few unclear photos, and a brown envelope sealed with cracked wax. On the envelope, there was no recipient's name, only a scribbled line. "If anyone finds this, read it when I'm gone." The handwriting was not Helen's, hard, strong, and much older. Michael opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter nearly 2 pages long. The paper yellowed as if it had endured many years hidden away. The letter began with the sentence, "My name is Eleanor B., and I must write this before I go, because the truth should not be buried any longer." The first line made Michael's heart tighten. He had never heard this name. The letter continued, "I did not give birth to the boy I am raising. I have never had a child." He read that sentence over and over as if he couldn't believe his eyes. All the doubts, vagueness, fears, and unanswered questions over the years converged into a cold slash running down his spine. The letter had an unclear date, only the faint 1956 at the top of the page, and the tone mixed remorse with fear of discovery. The content recounted that Eleanor received the child from a woman in dire circumstances who appeared in the summer of 1956 at a rundown motel in Amarillo. According to the letter, this woman brought a child about 1 to 2 years old, wrapped in a cloth, thin but with no signs of physical abuse. She introduced herself with a name that Eleanor admitted was certainly fake, because she provided no further information about her hometown, family, or reason for carrying the child. The most haunting part of the letter was the description of the moment the woman handed the child to Eleanor. She said she could no longer care for it, that the past is hunting her, and she just needed someone who could give the child a more peaceful life than she ever had. Eleanor wrote that she didn't ask more because the woman looked like she was about to collapse. She only knew that in those eyes there was fear, regret, and something like despair. Nevertheless, the letter immediately admitted that this was not entirely a humanitarian decision. Eleanor confessed, "I took the child because I was lonely and desperately wanted a child. I had lost my husband and had nothing left to hold on to." Following that was the confession that Eleanor herself had changed the name, changed the birth date, and filled out the birth certificate for the child. She chose 1954 because it fit the story from that woman, then recorded the place of birth as Amarillo, so that school registration later wouldn't have issues. She admitted to writing her own name on the birth certificate later, with newer handwriting because the original got wet. This immediately explained the points Michael had once doubted: the newer handwriting, the strange-looking birth date, the non-standard birth certificate. But what left Michael stunned the most was in the middle of the letter, where Eleanor wrote, "I don't know where this child came from. I don't know its real name." That woman said nothing except one sentence: "Its name no longer matters, just let it live." No description of hometown, no real parents' names, no exact timeline before 1956. Eleanor also admitted that she made no effort to verify or find out where the child came from. She only saw it as a chance to start life over. In the letter, she repeatedly mentioned feelings of guilt. "I know I was wrong for not reporting to the authorities, but I was afraid of losing the child, afraid they would take it to an orphanage. I lived in fear of being discovered for many years. Every time I saw a police car or heard news about kidnappings, I thought they would come for me." Notably, the letter had a section, "I heard on the radio about a missing child case in Oklahoma a few years earlier, and I always wondered, but I didn't dare check. If I was wrong, I would be haunted for life. If I was right, they would take it away from me." That line made Michael tremble. This was the first time he saw a direct, though vague, connection between himself and some missing person case before she took him in. Although Eleanor did not record the specific case name, year or location, the timeline Oklahoma a few years earlier completely matched the time Liam Foster disappeared in 1955. However, the letter also clearly stated, "I don't remember the child's name they mentioned on the radio. I only heard it vaguely." The lack of name, details, and data made the letter insufficient to verify the true identity of the child she adopted. But for Michael, this was the first undeniable proof that he was not Michael Briggs from the start. The letter ended with a short paragraph: "I know you deserve the truth, but it took me too long to say it. If someone reads this letter, please forgive me. I had no ill intent. I was just someone who wanted a family." No further instructions, no clues about the woman who gave the child, no address, no real full name, no identifying marks. Only fear, regret, and a larger void than before. Michael read the letter a second time, a third time, then folded it up. He felt as if he had just lost his mother and lost the foundation he had relied on for 16 years. If Eleanor was not his mother, and Helen was just the name she used when living in Texas, then who was she? And he, who was he really? The letter answered all doubts, but also opened a deeper void. He had no information to start searching for his own roots. No real name, no real birth date, no hometown, no data at all, except one sentence: Oklahoma, a few years earlier. And that only made him crave answers more than ever. After reading Eleanor's letter, Michael, now entering 17, fell into a state that no teenager could prepare for. His entire foundation of identity crumbled in just a few pages of paper. The letter gave him no specific clues beyond confirming that he was not Eleanor's biological child, not born in Amarillo, and possibly related to a missing person case in Oklahoma a few years earlier. That was too little to start a search journey, but too much for him to continue living as if he were Michael Briggs. As the 1970s arrived, traditional genealogy search services began appearing sporadically in large libraries, but no tool was powerful enough to verify the identity of a child with no real name, no real birth date, and no valid medical records. Many years later, when he turned 30, Michael still carried that doubt. Though he had moved to live in Albuquerque, working in a car repair garage to make a living, every time he saw an old silver-gray truck passing on the road, his heart would tighten because of memories he couldn't fully form. Michael kept Eleanor's letter throughout his adult years, but never once had the courage to take it to the police because he knew the letter lacked data to link to any missing person case. Only when he turned 50, as commercial DNA technology began to become widespread, did Michael see a door that could lead back to the past that had been taken from him. Genealogy services like Family Search, GeneQuest, MyHeritage, and later 23andMe began widely advertising the ability to find lost relatives through genetic testing. At first, Michael paid no attention, partly because he doubted the effectiveness, partly because he feared the results would only confirm that he belonged to no one. But memories of the blurry stroller, the fragmented memories of Oklahoma, and the letter signed Eleanor B. made him unable to ignore it forever. In 2015, when Michael was over 60, a friend at the garage told him he had found a distant relative thanks to a DNA kit. Michael was silent the whole day. That night, he took the letter from the drawer, read it for the 100th time, then decided, if I don't do it now, I'll die without knowing who I am. He ordered a DNA kit online, a basic autosomal DNA testing package. The kit arrived after a week. Michael opened the box, carefully read the instructions for collecting a saliva sample. Strangely, his hands shook when holding the tube, as if that small kit was touching the part he had tried to keep hidden his whole life. He mailed the sample on an autumn morning in 2015 and tried not to think about it. 3 weeks later, an email notifying results appeared in his inbox. Michael opened it with a heavy heartbeat. The screen displayed a list of genetic matches, genetic connections. Most were very weak connections, distant relatives, insignificant genetic branches. Michael thought his expectations were once again mistaken, until his eyes stopped at a line near the bottom of the list. DNA match, 48.2% shared, parent, child, or full sibling. Individual, Sarah F. Michael was stunned. The name Sarah F. suddenly brought back memories of the slightly older girl in his fragmented recollections. 48.2% was a match level that could only belong to a full sister or biological mother. But the biological mother had been confirmed by Eleanor as unknown name. Who was Sarah F.? Michael clicked on this person's public profile, only a short piece of information, born 1946. Oklahoma. Michael felt as if someone had struck him hard in the chest. Oklahoma. The word appeared in the letter, in his fragmented memories, in the vaccination question, in the recollections of the stroller, in the familiar feeling he couldn't name. Michael tried to find a contact email in the profile, but there was nothing. However, what he didn't know was that at the same time, the commercial DNA testing system automatically ran an algorithm matching against the missing persons database, a new feature added to assist law enforcement in identifying unnamed victims. And because his DNA results had an extremely high match level with a person with the last name Foster, a last name matching the missing person record of Liam Foster in 1955, the system automatically sent a notification to the National Genealogy Institute's Data Connection Center. Immediately, the record from Family Search matched an entry in the federal cold case database, missing child, Oklahoma, 1955, Liam Foster, age 1. A window popped up in the system, potential direct match, requires manual review. Within 24 hours, this information was forwarded to the National Cold Case Center, where long-dormant missing persons files were rescanned when a new matching DNA test appeared. A week later, a federal specialist began comparing Michael Briggs' DNA profile with Sarah Foster's DNA profile, the sister of Liam, who had submitted a DNA sample years earlier in hopes of one day finding her brother. Genetic matching confirmed Michael and Sarah shared 48.2% DNA, perfectly fitting the full sibling model with the same parents. The system flagged the match level as critical match, the entire missing person file for Liam Foster, which had been frozen since 1955, was immediately reactivated. The file was shifted to active review, high priority status, with an internal activation code, cold case reactivation. Foster 1955 OK. In the report sent to the Seminole Sheriff's Office, a simple but historic note, a living individual genetically linked to the Foster family has been identified. Michael had no idea that the decision to send one DNA sample had awakened an entire case buried for 6 decades. He only knew that a part of his mystery finally had a clear piece. He had a biological sister living in Oklahoma. And his real name, though no one had said it yet, was gradually returning from the darkness of more than 60 years stolen. After the federal DNA system sent the notification to reactivate the Foster 1955 OK file, the information was immediately forwarded to the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, where the current sheriff was Carla Jennings, a female investigator with over 20 years of experience handling long-term missing persons cases. Jennings received the report on a morning in October 2015, with the prominent line, "Genetic match high priority, possible identity, Liam Foster." She read and reread the DNA results between Michael Briggs and Sarah Foster, realizing that the match level was almost certain that Michael was the child who disappeared in 1955. Every line in the file sent chills down her spine. A 1-year-old child abduction, no leads, the perpetrator using a vehicle to flee the scene, decades of deadlock due to lack of technology. But now, a DNA submission from a man over 60 years old could break the 60-year silence. Jennings understood that to confirm the identity, she had to reopen the entire original file, one that had been dormant in storage since before she was even born. Jennings requested that the archive staff bring out all the Foster document boxes from the cold case area. The documents were dusty, the files stored in old folders, the papers faded, some corners already crumbling. She formed a small team of 3 investigators and began digitizing all the evidence. Every page was photographed, scanned, and entered into the new system, where it could be cross-referenced with modern data. The digitization process took several days, as the file contained hundreds of pages, including witness statements, scene sketches, evidence seizure reports, lists of suspect vehicles, and a series of reports sent from Texas and New Mexico in the 1960s. Once the documents were uploaded to the system, details that could not be seen with the naked eye in the old era now became clearer. Jennings and her team began reviewing each layer of data and connecting it to the new DNA information. They created a large board to mark the parts that could directly relate to Liam's true identity. Reports of a young woman traveling with a boy. Descriptions of a gray pickup truck, the alias Ann Lewis, used at a motel in Wichita Falls in 1955. When piecing these facts together, Jennings noticed that the letter from Eleanor, which Michael had emailed after the sheriff's office contacted him, mentioned the name Eleanor B. She paused at the B, feeling it was familiar. Jennings dug back into the Wichita Falls motel file, which had once been lost during the old investigation. Now, the scanned guest register list was enhanced through technology to clarify faded handwriting. And in the left corner of page 2, there was an entry that had been overlooked for 6 decades. Guest, Eleanor B. The writing, once blurred on the old paper, faded ink due to time, now appeared clearly through the technology. Jennings cross-checked the dates. December 20th, 1955. 1 day after Liam was abducted. The timing perfectly matched the travel route that Hale had once outlined. Jennings immediately called the team into the meeting room. We have the first connection between the old evidence and Eleanor's confession in the letter. She analyzed for the team. The letter said, Eleanor received the child in Amarillo, summer 1956. But the motel appearance occurred at the end of 1955. This could mean 2 possibilities. Either Eleanor moved through multiple places before settling, or the letter intentionally obscured the timeline. Either way, the name Eleanor B. was a piece that no one had been able to connect to the Foster case for many years. Jennings continued reviewing the digitized old documents and cross-referencing them with data from Michael. In the early misfiled section, a record from the Shawnee gas station, there was a description of gray truck silver paint, scratch on the left side. This description matched the neighbors' accounts of the Briggs family about the truck Helen had used while raising Michael. Jennings circled this detail in red because it confirmed that the vehicle appearing multiple times in the 1960s reports could be the very truck that took Liam out of Oklahoma. Moving to the data on the Harvey's grocery store report, where a witness described a young woman, brown hair, carrying a blue-gray scarf, Jennings compared it to the only photo of Eleanor found in Michael's file. Though the photo was blurry and poor quality, the facial features and age were relatively consistent with the 1955 description. Though not enough to conclude definitively, the level of coincidence was too clear to ignore. Jennings also reviewed the report on the blue-gray cloth fragment found on the Foster family fence. When comparing it to the scarf Michael had discovered in Helen's belongings the day Eleanor died, Jennings noted that the fabric was the same color and coarse weave. Though DNA testing on the fabric was impossible, since it had been lost, the matching material description strengthened the hypothesis that Eleanor had been present at the scene on the day Liam was abducted. When all the data was reconnected in the digitized system, Jennings saw clearly what Hale could not see in the 1950s. Every piece revolved around the same name and the same vehicle: a young woman with brown hair, an old gray truck, an alias appearing in Wichita Falls, a child handed to Eleanor, a blue-gray scarf, a boy who was not her biological son, and a DNA file confirming that a 60-year-old man was the brother of Sarah Foster. From the perspective of modern technology, the scattered pieces of 6 decades fit together into only one possible shape. Michael Briggs was Liam Foster. Jennings drafted the report to reopen the file with the code, Cold Case, Phase 2, Foster Reactivation, stating clearly, based on DNA cross-referencing and digitized data, the 1955 Liam Foster missing persons case is officially reactivated. That afternoon, she looked at the digitized file in front of her, a file that had been frozen not due to lack of effort, but due to lack of technology. Now, technology had brought the case back to her desk. Jennings let out a sigh, not from fatigue, but from understanding that ahead was no longer a lost file, but a journey to reclaim the truth of 60 forgotten years. Immediately after the file was reactivated, Sheriff Carla Jennings moved to the foundational task, fully reconstructing the perpetrator's travel route on December 20, 1955, based on all physical evidence, statements, receipts and scene analysis left by Hale's generation of investigators. Her goal was to create a minute-by-minute timeline, from the moment the perpetrator appeared near the Foster home until the gray truck left Oklahoma, to check whether Eleanor B., the person appearing in the motel receipt, could truly be the one who took Liam. Jennings began by uploading all the digitized data to the interactive map in the cold case system, marking each time milestone with color codes. Milestone 14:37 p.m., Harvey's grocery store. According to Lola's original statement, the brown-haired woman, petite build, carrying a blue-gray scarf, left the checkout at 4:43 p.m. Lola said she kept looking out the door, as if worried someone was following her. Jennings marked 4:43 p.m. as the time the perpetrator exited the store and headed toward the dirt road leading to the Foster residential area. Distance from Harvey's to the Foster home, 2.1 miles. With an old truck, average speed only about 20-25 miles per hour on dirt roads. Jennings calculated the perpetrator needed 5-6 minutes to reach the vicinity of the Foster home. That placed the perpetrator's arrival in the residential area around 4:49 p.m. Milestone 2, 4:49 p.m. Truck approaching the Foster home area. Jennings cross-referenced information from Route 1 witness. Harold saw a gray truck driving very slowly past the Foster home, then turning into a trail leading to the sparse woods behind the fence. Jennings matched this timing with Ruth's statement, who said she saw a figure near the fence between 4:45 and 4:50 p.m. Combining the data, Jennings reconstructed the behavior, The perpetrator drove around to the back of the residential area, parked the truck at a distance of no more than 40-60 meters from the Foster fence, then approached on foot. Milestone 3 4:54 p.m. Observation from the fence. The compacted soil marks that Hale had noted indicated someone stood in the same spot for at least 2-3 minutes. Jennings set the period from 4:50 to 4:54 p.m. as the phase when the perpetrator stood observing the family. At this time, according to Marjorie's statement, Liam was sitting in the stroller while Sarah was picking up toys. Jennings added a layer of analysis. The woman at Harvey's had a petite build, moved lightly, consistent with the soil marks, not being too deep. No heavy boot imprints from a man. Milestone 4:55 p.m. Marjorie leaves the yard for the kitchen. According to the statement, it took her only 20-30 seconds. This was the exact time gap the perpetrator waited for. Jennings pinned 4 hours 55 minutes and 15 seconds p.m. as the moment the perpetrator climbed over the fence and approached the stroller. Milestone 5 4 hours 55 minutes and 20 seconds, 4 hours 55 minutes and 40 seconds p.m. The abduction moment. Based on physical evidence, toy dropped near the gate occurred when Liam was lifted. No child footprint. Liam did not walk. No disturbed evidence in the yard. The action was extremely quick and deliberate. Jennings concluded the perpetrator needed only 15-20 seconds to pick up Liam, wrap him in the blue scarf, and leave the yard through the gate. Milestone 6 4 hours 55 minutes and 45 seconds p.m. Engine sound. Sarah stated she heard an engine starting from afar. Jennings cross-referenced distance from the gate to the parked truck 40-60 meters. Took about 10-15 seconds for the perpetrator to run there. This allowed the time frame 4 hours 55 minutes and 45 seconds, 4 hours 55 minutes and 55 seconds p.m. Liam placed in the truck. Broken rubber piece at the gate, noted the truck accelerating hard when leaving the scene. Milestone 7 4:56 p.m. Truck leaves the Foster dirt road. From the Foster home to the main intersection took about 90-120 seconds if driving fast. Jennings marked the time the perpetrator turned onto the main road at 4 hours 57 minutes and 30 seconds p.m. Milestone 8 4:58 5:10 p.m. Leaving the Seminole residential area. Depending on the turn, the truck could go South Wichita Falls, West Highway 59, Southwest Branch Road to Texas Panhandle. Jennings cross-referenced additional reports from a gas station 10 miles south of Seminole, where the attendant stated they heard an old truck with a weak engine passing around, approximately 5 o'clock. This fit perfectly with the route. Milestone 9 6:20 7 p.m. Crossing the Oklahoma-Texas border. With the average speed of an old truck, Jennings calculated it took about 80-90 minutes to reach the highway near Wichita Falls. A 1955 Texas police report mentioned a gray truck seen near a small motel around 7 p.m., not stopping. This matched the timestamp. Milestone 10 8:41 p.m. Name Eleanor B. appears in the Wichita Falls motel register. This was the key point. Jennings pinned this as the intersection between old and new data. If the perpetrator drove continuously from Oklahoma to Wichita Falls, the time from 4:56 p.m. to 8:41 p.m. was entirely reasonable. Distance of 110 miles, driving time 3 hours 40 minutes at average speed. The time perfectly matched the motel receipt. More importantly, the name Eleanor B. appeared right on the night after the abduction. Jennings checked further. The time from leaving Seminole to signing at the motel matched exactly the route the perpetrator could have taken, neither faster nor slower. Milestone 11. Matching Eleanor's possible movements. Jennings analyzed data from Michael. Helen Eleanor had lived nomadically before 1956. She used an old gray truck. Briggs' neighbors confirmed the engine was weak, body old and faded silver. The confession letter said she traveled many places before reaching Texas. Jennings looked at the timeline and saw no contradictions between Eleanor's possible movements and the 1955 reconstructed route. She had the time, the vehicle, the reason to leave Oklahoma immediately, and was present in Texas at the exact hours. Jennings continued cross-referencing traces. Left side scratch on Eleanor's truck in Texas matched 1955 witness descriptions. Blue-gray scarf in Eleanor's luggage matched the color and material of the fabric piece found at the Foster fence. Eleanor used an alias in the motel receipt, matching the confession letter. Eleanor appeared in Amarillo in 1956 with the baby in a scarf, matching the letter's account. When putting it all together, Jennings realized that the 1955 perpetrator's route from Harvey's Foster home Dirt Road Texas motel perfectly fit Eleanor's profile. No data excluded her, on the contrary, every piece pointed to her. Finally, Jennings completed the route reconstruction with the conclusion: the minute-by-minute timeline shows the perpetrator could leave the scene at 4:56 p.m., cross the border at 6:07 p.m., and arrive in Wichita Falls at 8:41 p.m. This is a time frame that matches absolutely with the appearance of Eleanor B. in the motel receipt. For the first time in 60 years, the route on the evening of December 20, 1955, was no longer a murky gap in the file, but became clear, logical lines tied to one single person. Sheriff Carla Jennings, after successfully reconstructing the 1955 route and seeing all the data converge on one single name, Eleanor B., moved to the next necessary step, locating and interviewing the surviving people who had known Eleanor to verify the details in the letter, her travel route, and her behavior during the 1955-1956 period. The list of potential informants was not long. Most Briggs' relatives had passed away, and old neighbors were either too elderly or no longer remembered clearly. However, Jennings found a particularly notable name in Texas civil records: Arthur Briggs, 82 years old. Eleanor's ex-husband, who had lived with her around 1957-1962 before separating. Arthur lived in a small nursing home in Amarillo. He was the only person who might have known Eleanor during the early years she raised Michael. Jennings went directly to meet Arthur, bringing the digitized file, motel receipt, old photos of Eleanor, and a copy of the letter Michael had found. The old man, with eyes still sharp despite his frail body, sat silently for a long time when she placed the blurry 1956 photo, the only one found of Eleanor, in front of him. Then he nodded slowly. "Yes, this is Helen, but back then, sometimes she said her name was Ellen, or Ellie. I never heard her use Eleanor, but I knew she changed her name before meeting me." This was the first important detail. Eleanor had changed names, consistent with the motel receipt, Eleanor B., and the confession letter, written under that name. Arthur said Eleanor always avoided talking about the time before 1956. She would dodge whenever asked about family, hometown, or reasons for leaving Oklahoma. One detail that caught Jennings' attention was that Arthur clearly remembered Eleanor's truck, gray-silver old model. Weak engine, long scratch on the left side. She said it got hit on a pump in Oklahoma, but I never saw any repair invoice. This description matched perfectly with Ruth's 1955 witness account, the 1963 Shawnee gas station witness, and the Harvey's grocery store description. Arthur also said Eleanor rarely let him drive that truck, saying it had many memories. The only time he tried driving it, Arthur noticed the right tire was more worn than the left, a detail that had appeared in the tire marks at the Foster home. When Jennings asked about Michael, Arthur was silent for quite a while before saying, "She said it was her child, but there was no trace whatsoever that she had ever been pregnant. No stretch marks, no old baby items, no photos. And she was always afraid someone would come to take the child back." Jennings asked, "Do you know where the baby came from?" Arthur replied, "No, she didn't say." I asked, and the only time I pressed too hard, she lost control and cried. She said if I dug up the past, I would make us both lose everything. This was a description matching the tone in Eleanor's letter: the persistent fear, the feeling of being hunted by the past, and the obsession that the child would be taken away. When Jennings showed the copy of the letter Michael found, Arthur's hands trembled as he said, "I've never seen this letter, but, yes, this is her handwriting." Whenever she was stressed or panicked, she wrote heavily, slanted letters, pressing hard on the paper. Arthur then provided another crucial clue: the period when Eleanor first left Amarillo. He remembered Eleanor confessing she had been traveling for weeks from Oklahoma to Texas, then to New Mexico before having a stable place. This matched the movement pattern Jennings had constructed: Seminole, Wichita Falls, Amarillo, Clovis. Arthur also mentioned a blue-gray scarf that Eleanor always kept in a wooden box under the bed, saying it was the only thing left from an old friend. When Jennings described the blue-gray fabric piece found on the Foster fence in 1955, Arthur fell silent. "I don't know where she got it, but she always held that scarf like a treasure." This was one of the strongest matching details between evidence and Eleanor's life, as it reinforced that the scarf found in Eleanor's belongings after her death was not random, but could be the very scarf used to wrap Liam on the day he was abducted. Jennings continued interviewing Arthur about specific timelines. Based on his sparse but consistent memory, Arthur confirmed that Eleanor appeared in Amarillo, early 1956, and said she had once told him, "I just escaped a terrible thing in Oklahoma." He didn't know what it was, but Jennings did. If Eleanor took Liam in late 1955, her state of panic upon arriving in Texas was entirely consistent. Jennings asked, "Did Eleanor ever mention Wichita Falls?" Arthur answered immediately, "Yes. She said Wichita Falls was where she stopped to rest and think about what she had done." Jennings felt goosebumps. This was indirect but powerful confirmation that the motel receipt with Eleanor B. was no coincidence. Eleanor had mentioned that exact town as an important place in her past. Continuing the investigation, Jennings asked Arthur to provide any remaining documents from his time with Eleanor. Arthur gave Jennings a small box containing a few old invoices, half a torn photo, and a notebook. In the notebook, one page read, "Texas Panhandle, never go back to Oklahoma. Never." Jennings immediately noted this detail, as it matched the route the perpetrator used: escaping Oklahoma, moving to Texas, cutting off the way back. When the interview ended, after more than 3 hours, Jennings realized that Arthur's statement not only fit Eleanor's letter, but also aligned tightly with the entire 60-year investigation model. The key points matched perfectly. Eleanor changed names multiple times, matched Eleanor B. on motel receipt, gray silver truck, left scratch, weak engine matched 1955 suspect vehicle, uneven tire wear, matched Foster home tire marks, blue-gray scarf, matched fabric at scene. Fear of past pursuing, matched motive for fleeing, mention of Wichita Falls, matched 8:41 p.m. stop, presence in Amarillo early 1956, matched post-abduction timeline. Jennings left the nursing home with a clear feeling. Finally, there was a living witness confirming the pieces that had existed only as speculation for decades. Every detail Arthur provided helped lock in the conclusion that Eleanor was not a coincidental adoptive mother, but the direct link in the 1955 abduction. On the way back to the office, Jennings knew the next point she needed to do was verify this information in public records, especially the timeline of Eleanor leaving Oklahoma. And if everything matched, the Foster case would no longer be a mystery. Immediately after completing the interview with Arthur Briggs and obtaining valuable data that further confirmed Eleanor's behavior, Sheriff Carla Jennings moved on to the most critical step in the entire reopened case file: DNA comparison to confirm the true identity of Michael Briggs. Although the commercial genealogy system had provided a 48.2% match between Michael and Sarah Foster, Jennings understood that the final scientific conclusion could only be recognized through official forensic DNA analysis, completely separate from commercial data. She coordinated with the Federal Genetic Testing Laboratory in Denver, which specializes in handling cold cases with suspected DNA matches. The first step was to collect a direct DNA sample from Michael Briggs via blood or buccal swab. Michael agreed to cooperate without hesitation, as from the moment he read Eleanor's letter, he knew his life could never return to its former state. The DNA sample was then coded, assigned the identifier FM 2015 OK, and sent to the Denver lab under federal evidence chain of custody procedures. On the other side, Jennings contacted Sarah Foster, who had submitted a DNA sample years earlier in a slim hope of finding her brother. Sarah agreed to provide a new DNA sample to ensure the most accurate results. Her sample was assigned the code SF1955 OK. Additionally, following the protocol for confirming direct kinship, Jennings also reached out to the grandson of Henry and Marjorie Foster, both of whom had passed away years earlier, to collect an additional indirect DNA sample, creating a three-tier comparison set: Michael, biological sister Sarah, Foster relatives. When the three samples were entered into the autosomal DNA analysis system, the laboratory began calculating genetic match indices using three methods: SNP analysis, comparison of long chromosomal regions likely to be shared through inheritance, and Mendelian inheritance pattern matching. The initial report arrived after 8 days. Jennings opened the email in the conference room, with the investigation team gathered around the table. The report stated clearly, FM 2015 OK and SF 1955 OK share 48.9% DNA. The length of matching segments perfectly aligns with the sibling model for full brothers and sisters with the same parents. Probability of biological sibling relationship, 99.9998%. This figure was not only sufficient for conclusion, it virtually eliminated any possibility of error due to random coincidence. The DNA analysts added one more important observation. The distribution of matching chromosomal segments includes long segments on chromosomes 1, 6, 12, and 17, characteristic of full sibling relationships in families with matching genetic structures. This was exactly the DNA pattern police had hoped for to confirm a person missing since infancy, but the results went even further. When Michael's DNA was compared to the Foster cousins, the findings showed FM 2015 OK shares a second-degree blood relationship with FH 2015 OK, consistent with the uncle-nephew model. This reinforced the genetic model across three layers: Layer 1, Michael Ordonez Sarah; Layer 2, Michael Ordonez Foster relatives; Layer 3, Sarah Noah Foster relatives. With all three layers matching, there was no room left for doubt in the conclusion. Michael Briggs was Liam Foster, the child who went missing on December 20, 1955, in Seminole County. The official laboratory report concluded in a cold but weighty tone: DNA results prove with 99.9998% probability that FM 2015 OK and SF 1955 OK are full siblings. The genetic data supports the hypothesis that Liam Foster is still alive. Jennings finished reading, leaned back in her chair, and suppressed a long sigh. 6 decades of investigation, hundreds of hours of tracing leads, dozens of false reports, countless procedural errors, and one modern DNA test had shattered all the fog that time had layered over the case. She immediately noted in the file, victim identity confirmed. Liam Foster is alive. Current legal name, Michael Briggs. Per cold case regulations, Jennings prepared a memorandum to the National Data Center, changing the file status from unresolved missing child to recovered, identity confirmed. She also updated the internal system with a short but historic line: scientific conclusion. DNA confirms Michael Briggs is Liam Foster. No further identity disputes. This was no longer speculation, intuition, or witness piecing. It was unbreakable genetic evidence, a language that neither time nor people could distort. Jennings looked at the still warm printed pages of the report, knowing that after 60 years, the Foster family's search finally had an answer. Not in despair, not through unidentified remains, but through the life of a person who had wandered away from his family before he even knew who to call mom or dad. And in that very moment, the Foster file, once the deepest wound in Seminole's history, was rewritten with the strongest scientific conclusion any case could receive. Sheriff Carla Jennings, after receiving the official DNA conclusion affirming that Michael Briggs was in fact Liam Foster, embarked on the most complex yet most humane step of the entire case file, organizing a reunion after 60 years of separation. To avoid causing psychological shock to both sides, Jennings proceeded step by step with great caution. She first contacted Sarah Foster, now 69 years old, who had lived her entire life with the memory of her little brother, vanishing before he could even call her name. When Jennings said, "We have found Liam," Sarah did not respond immediately. She just let out a heavy breath, then cried, as if 6 decades of pent-up emotion had been unlocked all at once. She confirmed she wanted to meet right away, but Jennings insisted on accompanying psychological and legal protocols, including preparing support staff in case the meeting caused overwhelming emotional shock. At the same time, Jennings informed Michael, who was still living in Albuquerque, about the DNA results. Though he had mentally prepared himself since seeing the genealogy match, the moment he heard Jennings say, "You are Liam Foster," still left Michael frozen in place. He stammered, Do I really have a family?" Then he had to sit down to compose himself. Jennings suggested that the first meeting take place in a neutral, quiet location, without media or outsiders present. Michael agreed immediately. Jennings contacted the Family Support Center in Oklahoma City, arranging a private room with sofas, a small wooden table, bottled water, and a family tree model to help explain the family history. In addition to Sarah, Jennings invited 2 other living Foster relatives, Emily Foster, granddaughter of Henry and Marjorie, who had provided the indirect DNA sample, Thomas Foster, a paternal cousin who had maintained the family archive for 30 years. They were people who knew the Foster history well and could help Michael piece together the parts of his life that had been stolen. Before the meeting, Jennings spent an hour explaining to Sarah and the relatives possible emotional states. Michael might be awkward, distant, or confused. His memories might not match what they had held on to. Conversely, Jennings told Michael that Sarah might be highly emotional or hug him immediately. She had searched for him her whole life, so her reactions would be natural. Finally, the reunion day arrived. The small meeting room was adjusted with warm lighting, curtains drawn, and no cameras present. Jennings stood by the door, hand on the knob, glancing at Michael, who was taking deep breaths. She asked, "Are you ready?" Michael nodded. When the door opened, Sarah stood up abruptly from her chair. She looked at Michael as if seeing a ghost returning from childhood. Michael, a man in his 60s, hair graying, slightly stooped from years of auto repair work, looked into the aged but familiar face, especially the way she tilted her head. A vague memory from that young boy suddenly surfaced, the image of an older girl picking up toys beside him. Sarah raised her hand to her mouth, choking up Liam. Michael stepped in, eyes wet but holding back, and finally spoke. "I think it's me." Sarah did not rush over or hug him right away. She approached slowly, as if afraid a strong touch would make the moment vanish. She placed her trembling hand on Michael's shoulder. "My little brother, you're really alive." Michael did not respond immediately. He placed his hand over hers, bowed his head, then suddenly embraced Sarah. The sound of both crying blended in the quiet room, audible down to each breath. Emily and Thomas stood to the side, eyes red. When they gradually calmed down, Jennings left the room to give them privacy. Sarah began sharing what the family had preserved for 6 decades, the day Liam disappeared. How panicked their mother was, how long their father searched, how the family moved but always left contact information with the sheriff's office, and how she submitted DNA in 2001 when the technology became available. She took out a small box containing a photo of Liam at 1 year old, a small white sock that had yellowed with age, and a missing child flyer she had kept in her wallet for over 50 years. Michael looked at the photo of the child he had never known was himself, then ran his finger along the edge of the old paper, falling silent. He asked Sarah about their parents. Sarah explained that Henry and Marjorie had passed away before knowing Liam was alive. Michael bowed his head deeply, hands clenched, as if trying to apologize for something he had never been at fault for. Thomas, who had an excellent memory for family history, opened the family ledger and pointed out Michael's place in the tree. "This is you. This is your sister Sarah. These are your mom and dad." With each branch Thomas indicated, Michael felt the missing parts of his life being filled in piece by piece. He whispered, Do I really have a place in this family?" Emily sat beside him, gently touching his hand. "Not just a place, you are the part of us that was missing." As the conversation shifted to the faint memories Michael had, the stroller, distant calls, images of a lawn, Sarah confirmed every detail. Yes, their yard had a stroller. Yes, Sarah often called Liam in the yard. Yes, their mother used a blue-gray blanket to wrap Liam every afternoon. These details made Michael shiver. Things he thought were dreams turned out to be real memories. Sarah held his hand and said softly, "You remember those things because they are real." The meeting lasted over 3 hours, and the severed fragments of Liam's life, from the day he was taken to his memoryless childhood with Eleanor, were woven back into the larger Foster family story. At the end, Sarah placed in Michael's hand a copy of Liam Foster's original birth certificate, something he had never seen but had always belonged to him. Michael held it for a long time, eyes reddening again. He said quietly, "I lived 60 years not knowing who I was. Thank you, sister, for never giving up on me." Sarah replied, "I promised Mom I would never stop looking for you, and today, I kept that promise." As they left the room, no one said goodbye, because finally, after 60 years, the Foster family was no longer separated. They walked out as a family stepping into a new chapter, full of loss, but also full of hope. News of Liam Foster, the child missing since 1955, being found alive after 6 decades, could not be kept secret for long, even though Sheriff Carla Jennings had tried to protect the privacy of both families. Just days after the reunion, a clerk at the Public Records Office accidentally leaked information about the Foster file being updated from unresolved missing child to recovered, identity confirmed. From there, the story spread like wildfire. Oklahoma media were the first to report it, with headlines sprawling across local news pages. 60-year-old missing child case solved. Child found alive. Within 48 hours, the story went national. Major newspapers, like the Oklahoman, Dallas Morning News, and USA Today, began covering it. And investigative TV programs like Dateline, 48 Hours, and Court TV flooded the sheriff's office with interview requests. When the DNA confirmation became public, social media exploded. Posts about Liam were shared hundreds of thousands of times, hashtags #FosterCaseReopened, and #60years missing trended on Twitter. Many people initially refused to believe the story was real, until the sheriff's office confirmed it with a brief statement. Liam Foster's identity has been verified through official DNA testing. The Seminole County community, which had carried the pain of Liam's loss across generations, reacted with astonishment and profound emotion. Elderly residents who had lived near the Foster family recalled never thinking the case would be solved. They remembered the desperate searches that year, Henry Foster running down dirt roads with a flashlight, little Sarah clutching missing child flyers. Upon learning Liam was alive, many cried as if something stolen from the community had been returned. Schools, libraries, and even the church the Fosters attended rehung memorial posters for the case, but this time with new wording, "Found." In the investigative world, the Foster case quickly became a prominent case study. Cold case experts called it a classic example of the power of modern DNA technology, capable of breaking open cases thought forever buried. Criminology conferences cited the Foster case as the clearest illustration of 3 key factors The combination of genealogy data and federal cold case systems, the power of digitizing old records, and the importance of preserving evidence no matter how much time passes. Many young investigators were trained using Sheriff Jennings' reconstructed timeline, as the Foster case demonstrated a model investigation structure from physical evidence to witnesses, from procedural errors to temporal gaps. Then the breakthrough of genetic technology. Numerous law enforcement agencies across the U.S. sent congratulations to the Sheriff's Office, calling it one of the most remarkable cold case resolutions of the 21st century. Missing persons advocacy organizations used the Foster example to push for expanded DNA testing budgets for pre-1980 cases. New policies were proposed to improve record storage and long-term victim family support. In the Oklahoma community, Liam's story reignited debates about how many opportunities the 1950s investigation system missed. If there had been more manpower, no recording errors. If the motel information hadn't been misfiled, and if the blue-gray blanket had been properly compared at the time. Some older residents said finding Liam was a healing moment for the whole town, not just the Fosters. National media began including the Foster case in lists of the longest resolved cold cases, alongside others closed through modern DNA analysis. TV networks produced numerous reenactment specials, emphasizing that Liam's survival was a rare miracle, completely different from most child abductions of the 1950s, 60s. Many articles compared the Foster case to other famous ones like J.C. Dugard or Stephen Stainer, cases where victims were taken and reappeared years later, though each had its own unique nature. While the public focused on Liam's 60-year journey, criminologists paid special attention to the perpetrator profile, a lone woman, not a repeat offender, without typical child abduction motives. Complex behavior hidden by interstate movement in an era when records weren't connected. Behavioral analysis training programs began using Eleanor's profile as an example of a non-traditional abductor, someone who didn't fit early FBI predictive models. As the news spread, many families with long-missing loved ones contacted the Sheriff's Office, hoping DNA technology could help them like it did the Fosters. Several old cases began being moved to review status, thanks to positive media pressure and the success of the Foster case. For the Foster family, media attention was both a blessing and a burden. They felt warmed by the public's shared joy, but also had to protect Liam, still Michael, from overly probing questions about a past he was only beginning to understand. The community seemed to always want more answers, always wanting to reconstruct the entire 60 lost years, but the family knew that some pains, memory gaps, and stolen years could not be filled by a few interviews or articles. Nonetheless, the Foster case had become a symbol of hope for millions across America. That time, no matter how long, cannot prevent the truth from returning. And that sometimes, the only thing needed to shatter 6 decades of silence is one small DNA sample placed in the right hands of people who know what to do with it. Immediately after the news of Liam Foster's reunion spread widely, the Seminole County Sheriff's Office and Oklahoma's legal department began entering the post-legal evaluation phase, a mandatory process for every cold case involving suspected criminal activity, even if the perpetrator is deceased. Sheriff Carla Jennings coordinated with the district attorney, criminal law experts, and federal advisors to determine whether the actions of Eleanor B., who raised Liam under the name Michael Briggs, could be prosecuted in any form if she were still alive, and whether any other individuals involved needed to face legal responsibility. The initial report focused on the core conduct. The 1955 child abduction that took place in Oklahoma, carried out by a female individual, with no legal documentation or guardianship agreement whatsoever. Under Oklahoma law in 1955, abducting a child to alter custody rights or remove the child from legal parents was a serious felony, punishable by 5 years to life imprisonment. However, the first complicating factor was the statute of limitations for child abduction in the 1950s, which differed from modern standards. While today serious child abductions often have no statute of limitations, in 1955 Oklahoma law, distinguished between abduction for ransom, no limitation, and abduction to change custody, with a limitation of 3 to 5 years depending on circumstances. Liam's case, according to legal analysis, fell into the second category, a lone woman taking the child to raise him and change his identity, without any ransom or commercial element. This meant the statute of limitations expired by the late 1950s, making prosecution of Eleanor nearly impossible under the law, even if she were still alive. Next, investigative agencies examined whether Eleanor's conduct during the raising of Michael constituted any federal crimes or continuing offenses, those not bound by statutes of limitations. These included kidnapping across state lines, use of false identity, forging a birth certificate, transporting the victim across multiple states. However, file analysis revealed a more complex situation in 1955. The Lindbergh Act, which governed federal kidnapping, required the element of interstate transportation with criminal intent or for ransom. Eleanor demanded no money, made no contact with the Foster family, and issued no threats. Her actions stemmed from personal motives, illegal adoption. Therefore, even though Eleanor crossed the Oklahoma-Texas border with Liam, federal law at the time did not automatically apply. Her use of a forged birth certificate faced similar time barriers. Falsifying government records was an offense with a 3 to 7 year statute of limitations in the 1950s. By the time of Eleanor's death, all limitations had long expired. Jennings and the legal team continued evaluating the possibility of pursuing accountability against any surviving involved parties, if any existed. This could include Arthur Briggs or anyone who knew about the abduction but failed to report it. Arthur, through his statements, showed he had no knowledge that Liam was abducted. He believed Eleanor had legally adopted the child before they met. There was no evidence he ever suspected or covered up criminal activity. Eleanor's former neighbors were also not considered legally responsible. No one knew about the abduction. They simply saw a single woman raising a child and had no reason to report anything. Thus, no living individual could be prosecuted as an accomplice. The legal report also considered whether a posthumous investigation could be opened to establish symbolic criminal responsibility. However, Oklahoma law does not recognize prosecution of a deceased person. Courts do not try deceased defendants, and all proceedings cease. The only thing the sheriff could do was incorporate the legal conclusion into the file, confirming the sole perpetrator as Eleanor B., and closing the case per cold case standards. Jennings requested the legal team draft an official conclusion stating, "The primary perpetrator was Eleanor B. Wall. She acted alone. The conduct constituted child abduction under 1955 law. All statutes of limitations expired decades ago. There was no evidence of accomplices. No remaining individuals could be prosecuted." The report concluded that the Foster case no longer had any prosecutable criminal elements, but this did not diminish the severity of the act or the pain the Foster family endured for 60 years. It merely reflected the limitations of the legal system in handling crimes across time. For the legal community, the case became a classic example of a non-prosecutable solved case. Those fully resolved factually, but unable to go to trial because the perpetrator is deceased, or the statute of limitations has run. Sheriff Jennings acknowledged in an internal report that the hardest part to accept was not the inability to prosecute, but the fact that the Foster family had to wait 60 years for the truth, when the law at the time failed to protect them adequately. Nevertheless, Jennings emphasized that the greatest goal, confirming Liam's identity and returning him to his real family, had been achieved. And that was the only victory the law could deliver in a case where time had taken away the opportunity for traditional justice. The truth was confirmed, the reunion took place, and the legal file was completed, but Liam's next journey, the man who had lived over 60 years as Michael Briggs, became the most complex phase that no one but he could directly experience. Any missing person case resolved after decades places the victim before a dual challenge, adjusting identity and processing lifelong psychological gaps. Immediately after the reunion, Liam, though moved and happy, began experiencing profound inner turmoil. In the investigation file, Jennings noted, Liam displays strong attachment to the Foster family, but simultaneously feels guilt and displacement for 6 decades severed from them. That was not an unfamiliar feeling. Psychologists who have studied long-term missing victims all point to a phenomenon called identity displacement, the state where a person must reconcile two inconsistent selves, the name lived under for a lifetime and the name belonging to the true self. For Liam, this was even more intense because he had built a full life as Michael Briggs, career, friends, adult memories, and personal sorrows. When victim support program counselors met him, the question he repeated most was, "Who do I have to live as? Liam Foster or Michael Briggs?" For many weeks, he felt like he was standing between two parallel paths. As Michael, he had a real familiar lived history. As Liam, he had true origins, family love, and the answer he had sought his whole life. Those two selves could not merge overnight. To adapt, Liam was introduced to a therapist experienced in supporting victims found after many years missing. In therapy sessions, Liam began realizing that identity is not an exclusive choice. Both names belong to him, just from different periods. The therapist described the process as stitching two torn halves of a life into one unified timeline. However, it was not always smooth. Daily, when Liam drove home after visiting the Fosters, he often pulled over, choked with guilt. "My parents died without knowing I was alive," he told Sarah once. Sarah hugged him and softly replied, "It's not your fault. You didn't choose to be taken." Still, that remorse lingered, especially at night when he looked at old Foster family photos. He saw pictures of himself at age 1, a child he remembered nothing about, and felt the loss as if his own life had been stolen without his right to resist. The absence of childhood memories in Oklahoma left him unsteady. No laughter, no mother's face, no father's voice, all the things an ordinary person can easily recall, were absolute voids for him. But Liam did not just lose family memories, he lost the essential childhood needed to build identity. Long-term missing victims often experience post-traumatic identity confusion, and Liam was no exception. He had to face a painful question. Does my life from age 1 until now belong to me, or is it just the consequence of a crime? Psychological therapy helped him realize that his life, even if redirected, was the life he had lived. Every relationship, every job, every sorrow and joy was real. But at the same time, nothing could deny that 60 years separated from his birth, family, was a bitter truth. As he began integrating with the Foster family, Liam faced another challenge. Expectations. Sarah and relatives, though trying to restrain themselves, showered him with decades-compressed affection. They wanted to know how he had lived, whether he was happy, what he needed. At times, Liam felt overwhelmed by that love, too great and too belated. Though they never blamed him, Liam still felt the burden of the late returnee. However, time gradually made things more natural. He began visiting them every weekend, having dinner together, looking at old photo albums he had never been part of before. Gradually, the Foster family stories became part of his life, no longer just distant fragments. The Oklahoma community also welcomed him as a returning son. The church the Fosters attended held a Welcome Home Liam service, but Liam requested it be private. He did not want to become a symbol or a news story. He just wanted time to become himself within his real family. In the early months, he struggled with public reactions, neighbors, media, curious onlookers. Sheriff Jennings had to ask the media to keep their distance so Liam could have breathing room. Over time, Liam began making small choices to self-adjust his identity. He did not legally change his name immediately, he told Sarah. "I need time to get used to the name Liam." But he started signing personal documents as Michael Foster Briggs, a way to connect the two halves of his life. That combination helped him gradually see that identity was not two conflicting parts, but two layers of time forming the person he is. At the end of the initial integration phase, Liam began spending more time with the Foster family while still maintaining his quiet life in Albuquerque. He knew he could not make up for the 60 lost years, but he could start with the months and years remaining. And most importantly, he no longer had to wonder who he was. He is Liam. He is Michael. He is both. And for the first time in his life, he felt that was no longer a contradiction. Though the reunion closed a major part of the 6-decade journey, the Liam Foster case still leaves many questions that can never be fully answered, because time has erased decisive evidence, and those who held the truth are no longer alive. The first thing that can never be verified is Eleanor's true motive on the night of December 20th, 1955. Did she take Liam out of panic, desperate longing for a child, or some reason never recorded? Fragments in the confessional letter suggest both fear and calculated flight, but there is no direct confession about the moment she decided to cross the Foster yard fence. The second detail, never clarified, is the woman who handed Liam to Eleanor in Amarillo in 1956. The letter only describes a vague figure, with a false name and unstable mental state. No facial description, no address, no knowledge of whether she was an accomplice, a victim of her own circumstances, or simply someone Eleanor met at the wrong time. It cannot be determined if that person was connected to the abduction or merely held the baby after Eleanor left Oklahoma. Another question never answered is whether Eleanor acted entirely alone throughout or had any assistance. The escape route was reasonably reconstructed, but gaps remain on the journey from Seminole to Wichita Falls, minutes, even hours, without witnesses or records. There is no clear evidence she met anyone or stopped anywhere besides the one recorded motel. Those who could reveal this are deceased, leaving the case forever cold in some key details, even though identity has been resolved. Another part that cannot be clarified is the exact moment Liam was taken from the yard, no account from the victim, and Liam's memory from that period is completely gone. This leaves police only able to rely on footprints, physical evidence, and logical reconstruction, but never knowing for sure if Liam cried, resisted, or was coaxed by Eleanor. This is a gap that even Liam, despite trying, will never fill. Additionally, the case contains unprovable hypotheses, such as whether Eleanor ever intended to return Liam or contact the Foster family in the early years. Some lines in the letter suggest hesitation, wanting to do the right thing, but not daring to look back. But what that means, and whether she ever faced such an opportunity, no one knows anymore. The hypothesis about the mysterious person in Wichita Falls, recorded in old motel records as having briefly spoken with Eleanor, also cannot be checked. That person could be innocent, but might have held key information. A witness swept away by time before any questions were asked. All those gaps form the no further investigation possible portion of the case, but they actually increase the value of what was found. The most important truth, that Liam was alive, still broke through the thick fog of 60 years. For the cold case investigation field, the Foster case became a benchmark for the persistence of records and human limits in a pre-technology era. Sheriff Hale's generation in 1955 did everything possible at the time, documenting evidence, collecting statements, mapping routes. But lacking DNA analysis technology, federal databases, and digital archiving, the case fell silent for decades. When the file was reopened in 2015, technology had completely changed the game. The Foster case became a classic lesson that cold cases do not die. They simply wait for technology to catch up. Moreover, this case proved the value of digitizing records, because if Jennings had not scanned every page, the name Eleanor B. in the Wichita Falls motel might have remained forever in faded handwriting on paper. Many agencies began campaigns to refresh old files, pushing for complete data to wait for when DNA genealogy or other tools provide new leads. In forensic science, the Foster case solidified the central role of genealogical DNA, a field once controversial over privacy concerns. Previously, investigators had to wait for physical evidence to appear. Now, A single individual submitting DNA for relative search can unlock cases thought forgotten forever. This opens revolutionary potential. Cold cases from the 1940s, 70s can be decoded one by one. Unidentified victims can regain names after generations. Long missing families can reunite, thanks to one small DNA sample. However, the Foster case also reminds us that technology cannot solve everything. DNA can answer who, but never fully why. Eleanor's final moments, the thoughts she carried, and the choices leading to Liam's fate remain forever beyond science's reach. Looking back, the Foster case carries dual meaning. It is proof of technology's power in bringing victims home to families, but also a reminder that many parts of human truth do not lie in laboratories. They vanish with those who held them. And amid those unanswered questions, the greatest remaining value is what the Foster family received after 60 years: life, identity, and a name thought lost forever restored. Who took Liam away? Eleanor, but who brought Liam back? Time and DNA. Liam Foster's reunion story after 60 years missing is not just the journey of solving a cold case. It also reflects today's American society, where tens of thousands of children are still reported missing each year, and many families live in endless waiting. One of the clearest lessons from Liam's case is the power of DNA technology and modern data storage systems. Without genealogical DNA testing, which Liam submitted only due to a personal urge, the Foster case would likely have remained in the past forever. This reminds us that in the digital age, every individual can help protect their family by maintaining clear personal records, updating family DNA in missing person systems, and staying connected to community in case of emergencies. The story also emphasizes the importance of family history and personal identity. Liam grew up with painful gaps because he did not know who he was. This stemmed from Eleanor deliberately severing all his ties to the real world. Today, in a mobile and diverse society like the United States, preserving family stories, from photos, birth certificates, to recounted memories, is not just tradition, but a way to protect against unforeseen ruptures. Finally, the Foster case shows that community and the legal system must always persevere, no matter how long time stretches. Without Sheriff Hale's initial documentation effort, Sheriff Jennings's dedication in digitizing every old page, and Sarah Foster's enduring love in submitting DNA years earlier, Liam would never have returned. The lesson for Americans today is justice does not always come early, but it will come if people do not give up. If you are interested in journeys of rediscovering identity and family reunions after decades like Liam Foster's story, please subscribe to join us for the next cases. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where every truth found carries healing meaning.